Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, where the galaxy burns with endless war and the Emperor's domain stretches across 1,000,000 worlds, there exist warriors who inspire fear not just in the enemies of mankind, but in their very allies. These are the silent hunters, the void predators, the grey-clad spectres who emerge from the blackness between stars to deliver the Emperor's judgment with a brutality that few can comprehend. They are the Carcharodons, known in the common tongue as the space sharks, and their story is one written in blood across the dark edges of Imperial space. Imagine, if you will, the absolute darkness of the void beyond the galactic rim. Out there, past the furthest reach of the Astronomican's light, where even the bravest Imperial vessels fear to venture, entire fleets prowl in eternal vigilance. And they are hunting grounds where ancient warships, their hulls scarred by centuries of conflict, drift through the cosmic night like predators in deep water. Within these vessels move warriors whose eyes are pools of absolute darkness, whose skin is pale as death itself, and who communicate in whispers and silence rather than the battle cries of their more celebrated cousins. These are the Carcharodons, and to encounter them is to understand that there are fates worse than death in service to the Emperor. The Carcharodons represent something unique among the 1,000 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. Where others maintain proud fortress monasteries on verdant worlds, recording their glories in marble and gold, the space sharks exist as nomads of the deepest void. Where other chapters cultivate relationships with the wider Imperium, participating in crusades and submitting regular tithes, the Carcharodons vanish for centuries at a time, appearing only when the need is most dire or when they come to claim what they call the Red Tithe. Where most space marines are celebrated as angels of death, inspiring hope in Imperial citizens, the Carcharodons inspire something closer to dread, even among those they have come to save. Their reputation precedes them like the scent of blood in water. Stories are whispered in the dark corners of Imperial space about grey-clad giants who fight in complete silence, who show neither mercy nor hesitation, who take what they need from Imperial worlds and vanish back into the void without explanation or apology. Tales speak of entire generations of young men taken from conquered worlds, are forced to fight each other to the death for the privilege of joining the chapter's ranks. Rumors persist of ancient pacts and terrible oaths, of exile and atonement, of a chapter that exists outside the normal structures of Imperial authority while remaining loyal to the Golden Throne. But who are these warriors truly? What drives them to patrol the uttermost darkness? What ancient wrong do they seek to atone for with 10,000 years of bloody service? These questions have plagued Imperial scholars and inquisitors for millennia, and the answers remain frustratingly elusive. The Carcharodons leave no records of their activities in Imperial databases. They claim no officially recorded battle honors. Even their founding is shrouded in mystery, with some sources suggesting they date back to the second founding, in the aftermath of the Horus heresy, while others claim they are a much younger chapter from the 23rd founding, nearly 8 millennia later. What we do know paints a picture of warriors shaped by their environment, creatures of the void, who have become something other than typical space marines. They are hunters who have hunted so long in darkness that they have become darkness themselves. They are angels of death who have delivered death so often that they have forgotten what it means to be anything else. They are the Emperor's sharks, and the galaxy is their hunting ground. As we delve deeper into the mystery of the Carcharodons, we will explore their possible origins in the shame and exile of the Great Crusade, and examine the genetic legacy that marks them as different from their brother chapters, witness their savage combat doctrines in action, and follow their most famous campaigns from the Badab War to the Outer Darkness, where they make their eternal hunt. We will meet Tiberos the Red Wake, their towering chapter master, whose very presence speaks of barely contained violence. We will walk the corridors of their ancient ships and understand the culture of silence and brutality that defines them. And perhaps, if we are fortunate, we will glimpse the truth behind their 10,000-year vigil. But be warned, to learn about the Carcharodons is to peer into an abyss that stares back with eyes of fathomless black. It is to understand that the Imperium's survival sometimes requires tools that are as terrible as the enemies they face. Then it is to recognize that in the eternal war for humanity's survival, some warriors must become monsters so that others may remain human. The void awaits. The hunt begins. Let us descend into the darkness and discover what swims there. Section 1. Origins in Shadow. The question of the Carcharodons' origins is perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding this enigmatic chapter. Unlike the proud lineages of the Blood Angels or the well-documented history of the Ultramarines, the Carcharodons emerge from the historical record like specters, their beginnings obscured by time, deliberate secrecy, and the selective amnesia of imperial record-keeping. Multiple theories exist, each supported by fragmentary evidence and tantalizing clues, yet none providing a definitive answer to the question, where do the space sharks come from? As the most commonly accepted theory, at least among those imperial scholars who have studied the matter, suggests that the Carcharodons are a successor chapter of the Raven Guard, the 19th Legion founded by Primarch Corvus Corax. The evidence for this connection is circumstantial but compelling. The physical mutations exhibited by the Carcharodons, their pale skin and completely black eyes, are identical to those seen in the Raven Guard and its confirmed successor chapters. These are not cosmetic affectations, but genetic markers, alterations to the phenotype caused by the specific characteristics of Raven Guard gene seed. That two chapters would independently develop identical mutations, strains, credibility beyond breaking. Moreover, the Carcharodons' chapter master bears the title of Shade Lord, as a designation that appears nowhere else in imperial military hierarchy except in one place. It was the rank held by Arcus Fal, the Legion Master of the Raven Guard's Terran-born warriors, before Corvus Corax assumed command of the 19th Legion. Fal was a controversial figure, a warrior whose methods were considered brutal, even by the standards of the Great Crusade. When Corax reunited with his legion and discovered the practices of his Terran sons, warriors who had been recruited from the prison forges and slavery pits of ancient Terra, he was reportedly disgusted by their reliance on terror tactics and mass executions. These were methods Corax, who had led a slave rebellion on his homeworld of Deliverance, found abhorrent. According to fragmentary records from the Horus Heresy, Corax dispersed many of these Terran veterans into what were called nomad predation fleets, independent formations sent to the furthest reaches of imperial space to continue the Great Crusade, far from the Primarch's direct oversight. These fleets were given a sacred duty, to travel beyond the Imperium's borders and hunt the Emperor's enemies in the darkness where no other imperial forces ventured. They were exile and honor combined, a way for Corax to remove warriors whose methods he despised while still utilizing their undeniable effectiveness. The parallels to the Carcharodons are impossible to ignore. The chapter follows what imperial tacticians call the nomad predation pattern, a rare strategic doctrine focused on extended void-based operations far from imperial supply lines. They operate beyond the galactic rim, and in the same regions where Corax's exile fleets were sent. They utilize equipment and tactics that date back to the Great Crusade era, before the standardization imposed by the Codex Astartes. Most tellingly, ancient Carcharodon records refer to something called the Day of Exile, and speak of a mandate given by one they call only the Forgotten One, a figure who granted them remit unbound, to set about the traitor, the alien, and the renegade without mercy. Could the Forgotten One be Arcus Fal himself? Could the Carcharodons be the direct descendants of those Terran Raven Guard who were exiled into the outer darkness? The chapter's possession of the battle barge Nikor, mentioned in Forge World's historical records as one of the uniquely powerful capital ships of the nascent Imperium, and known to have been part of the Raven Guard's fleet during the Great Crusade, adds weight to this theory. Such vessels were not easily come by, and for the Carcharodons to possess one suggests a direct line of inheritance from the earliest days of the Imperium. Yet the story is not so simple. Complications arise when we examine the Carcharodons' gene seed more closely. While Imperial armor documents describe their gene seed as surprisingly pure and stable, particularly when compared to the degraded genetic legacy of the modern Raven Guard, there are anomalies that suggest a more complex heritage. The Carcharodons suffer from a condition they call the blindness, and a combat frenzy during which they lose all control and may even attack their own battle brothers. This is not a characteristic of Raven Guard gene seed, but bears similarities to the combat psychosis exhibited by the World Eaters Legion before their fall to chaos. More troubling still are hints dropped in the Black Library novel Red Tithe, which strongly suggests that the Carcharodons may possess chimeric gene seed, genetic material drawn from multiple Primarchs. When the chapter engages in barter with the renegade Ashen Claws, another group of Raven Guard exiles who abandoned the Imperium rather than serve under Corax's command, the Ashen Claws make careful inquiries about whether the Carcharodons' gene seed has been contaminated with their disgusting breed. The Ashen Claws leader even refers to a captured World Eater as a brother of the Carcharodons, implying a blood connection that goes beyond mere professional courtesy. This opens the possibility that the Carcharodons are not simply Raven Guard successors, but rather a chapter formed from multiple gene seed sources. Perhaps they began as Arcus Fal's Terran veterans, but were later supplemented with genetic material from loyalist elements of traitor legions. We know that during the Horus Heresy, some warriors from the World Eaters and Night Lords remained loyal to the Emperor, despite their legions' fall to chaos. These loyalists were often formed into Black Shield units, but warriors who renounced their former allegiances and fought without heraldry or official recognition. Could the Carcharodons represent an attempt to preserve and utilize these gene lines? Warriors whose genetic legacy was too valuable to discard, but too tainted by association to be openly acknowledged. The theory gains credence when we consider the Carcharodons' combat doctrine. While their preference for stealth and surprise attacks echoes the Raven Guard's tactical preferences, their savage close-quarters fighting style and emphasis on terror tactics more closely resembles the methods of the Night Lords. Their ability to enter and sustain berserker-like combat states, fighting with relentless aggression until every enemy is destroyed, mirrors the World Eaters' combat psychology. They are, in essence, as a hybrid force that combines elements of multiple legions' tactical doctrines and genetic traits. Some scholars have even suggested connections to other primogenitors. The Carcharodons' preference for lightning raids and their nomadic fleet-based existence has led some to propose White Scar's ancestry, though this theory has less supporting evidence than the others. What seems clear is that the Carcharodons represent something unique in the history of the Adeptus Astartes, a chapter whose very existence may be a deliberate secret, warriors whose genetic heritage was designed to be obscured rather than celebrated. This brings us to perhaps the most intriguing aspect of their origin story, the question of why they exist at all. If the Carcharodons were indeed formed from exiled Raven Guard and genetic material from traitor legions, what purpose did their creation serve? The answer may lie in the strategic situation of the early Imperium. During the Great Crusade and in the aftermath of the heresy, the Imperium's borders were constantly expanding and contracting. Beyond the reach of normal Imperial forces, in the darkness of the galactic fringe and the void between spiral arms, threats constantly emerged that required immediate and ruthless response. The Carcharodons may have been created specifically to patrol these dark spaces, to serve as a strategic reserve that could respond to threats before they penetrated deeper into Imperial space. Their exile was not punishment, but assignment, a recognition that certain types of warfare required certain types of warriors. By keeping them beyond the Imperium's official borders, operating in the shadows without official recognition, the High Lords of Terror and the surviving loyal Primarchs ensured that the Imperium had defenders even in places where defenders should not exist. This explains the chapter's peculiar legal status. When the Carcharodons arrived during the Badab War, their chapter master Tiberos presented notices patent, legal documents affirming the chapter's rights and privileges, issued by High Lords of Terror and Inquisitors who had been dead for millennia. These ancient authorizations granted the chapter extraordinary autonomy, allowing them to operate outside normal imperial command structures while still being recognized as loyal servants of the emperor. They were, in effect, sanctioned outlaws, warriors given permission to exist beyond the normal rules that governed the Adeptus Astartes. The connection to the Ashen Claws adds another layer to this mystery. The Ashen Claws are confirmed descendants of the Raven Guard's 18th chapter, warriors who despaired during the Horus heresy and chose neither to serve the emperor nor the traitor Horus. Instead, they fled into the darkness beyond imperial space, establishing hidden domains in the galactic fringe, where they have survived for 10,000 years. The fact that the Carcharodons maintain contact with these renegades, trading gene seed and supplies for recruits and information, suggests a relationship that predates the modern Imperium. Perhaps the two groups were once part of the same exile fleets, brothers who chose different paths when faced with the choice between loyalty to the Emperor or loyalty to their Primarch. There is a darker possibility as well. Some heretical texts, those that survive only in the deepest vaults of the Inquisition, suggest that the Carcharodons may be one of the lost legions, the 2nd or 11th legions, that were expunged from imperial records so thoroughly that even their Primarchs' names were stricken from history. The evidence for this is thin, based primarily on the absolute nature of the Carcharodons' removal from official records, and the fact that their physical mutations, particularly the development of shark-like denticles on their skin as they age, do not match any known Primarch's genetic legacy. If this theory were true, it would mean the Carcharodons represent something even more troubling, a legion that committed some great crime or harbored some terrible flaw, yet was deemed too useful to destroy outright. The truth, in assuming such a thing can ever be fully known, likely combines elements from multiple theories. The Carcharodons probably began as Arcus Phal's Terran Raven Guard, warriors exiled for their brutal methods, but still loyal to the Emperor's vision. During or after the Horus heresy, they may have incorporated loyalist elements from traitor legions, warriors seeking redemption through service in the outer darkness. Over 10,000 years of operation beyond imperial space, their gene seed may have degraded or mutated in ways that make their exact origins impossible to determine with certainty. What we can say with confidence is that the Carcharodons exist outside the normal structures of the Imperium by design rather than accident. They are warriors purpose-built for a specific role, to patrol the darkness beyond civilization's light, as to hunt enemies that other chapters never encounter, and to do so with methods that other chapters would find unacceptable. They are the Emperor's sharks, predators in human form, and like all predators, they are most effective when they operate in darkness. Their origin in shadow is thus not merely an accident of lost records or deliberate secrecy, though both play their parts. It is fundamental to what they are. The Carcharodons emerged from darkness, have hunted in darkness for 10 millennia, and will likely end in darkness should they ever cease their vigil. To understand them, we must accept that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some questions unanswered. In the case of the Carcharodons, the mystery itself is part of their weapon, the uncertainty part of their terror. An enemy who does not know what he faces, and who cannot predict what methods will be employed, who cannot appeal to shared traditions or common origins, is an enemy already half defeated. The Void remembers its own, and the Carcharodons belong to the Void now more than they ever belonged to any Primarch or Legion. They have been shaped by 10,000 years in the darkness, molded by combat against enemies that would break other chapters, tempered by isolation that would drive lesser warriors mad. Whether they began as Raven Guard or World Eaters, as Loyalists or Exiles, as Second Founding or 23rd, matters less than what they have become. The silent hunters of the outer darkness, the grey-clad terrors that emerge from the void to remind the galaxy that even in the blackest night, the Emperor's judgment finds its mark. Section 2. The genetic legacy. To understand the Carcharodons, one must first understand the fundamental truth of the Adeptus Astartes. They are not merely warriors in armor, but post-human beings, genetically engineered super soldiers whose very biology has been rewritten by the implantation of 19 specialized organs derived from their Primarch's genetic template. The gene seed that creates a space marine carries not just enhanced physical capabilities, but also psychological traits, predispositions, and even physical characteristics that reflect the Primarch from whom it was originally derived. It is written in flesh and bone, a biological inheritance that shapes the character of entire chapters. The Carcharodons' gene seed is perhaps as mysterious as their origins, are marked by distinctive mutations and characteristics that set them apart from other chapters while simultaneously providing clues to their possible ancestry. The most immediately obvious of these characteristics is their physical appearance, a combination of features that would make them instantly recognizable to anyone who had encountered them, assuming those observers survived the experience. Every Carcharodon possesses skin of a distinctive pallor, a bloodless white that gives them the appearance of corpses rather than living warriors. This is not the result of any disease or malformation, but a consistent genetic trait that manifests in every member of the chapter, regardless of what world they were recruited from or what their original skin tone might have been before their transformation. The gene seed overwrites this fundamental aspect of their appearance, bleaching their flesh to a uniform deathly white that becomes more pronounced with age. By the time a Carcharodon has served his chapter for a century, his skin takes on an almost luminous quality in darkness, as though he were a ghost or wraith rather than a mortal being. Paired with this pallor are their eyes, perhaps their most disturbing feature. A Carcharodon's eyes are completely black, not merely the irises, but the entire visible eye, including what should be the white sclera. They are pools of absolute darkness, lightless voids that give no hint of the thoughts or emotions behind them. To look into a Carcharodon's eyes is to stare into an abyss, to see nothing reflected back but your own mortality. This too is a genetic trait, one that manifests shortly after the implantation of gene seed organs and remains constant throughout the Space Marine's life. These two characteristics, the pallid skin and black eyes, are shared with the Raven Guard and several of their confirmed successor chapters. In the case of the Raven Guard, these traits are known to be mutations caused by degradation of their gene seed, damage that occurred during the Horus Heresy, when their Primarch Corvus Corax attempted to accelerate the chapter's rebuilding through experimental gene forging techniques. The experiments went catastrophically wrong, resulting in hundreds of failed Space Marines and permanent damage to the Legion's genetic legacy. Ever since, Raven Guard successors have carried these marks as a reminder of that terrible mistake. However, Imperial armor records, those rare texts that document the Carcharodons' participation in the Badab War, note something curious about the chapter's gene seed. It is described as unusually pure and stable. This stands in stark contrast to the degraded gene seed of the modern Raven Guard. If the Carcharodons were indeed descended from Corvus Corax's legion, their gene seed should show similar signs of degradation and instability. The fact that it does not suggests either that the Carcharodons split from the Raven Guard before the disastrous experiments, or that their gene seed comes from an entirely different source that happens to produce similar physical characteristics. The mystery deepens when we examine other mutations present in the Carcharodons. As they age, members of the chapter develop something unique among Space Marines: rough, but tooth-like denticles that grow from their skin, particularly around the neck, elbows, and other joints. These are not merely cosmetic, but are actual calcified growths emerging from the dermis, giving older Carcharodons a rough, scaled appearance reminiscent of their chapter's namesake. This condition is described in their records as coming from degraded genetic inheritance, suggesting that their gene seed is not as pure as some sources claim, or that its purity is relative only to the severely compromised Raven Guard stock. The development of these shark-like features becomes more pronounced the longer a warrior serves. Ancient veterans of the chapter, those who have survived centuries of combat in the outer darkness, develop extensive denticle coverage that gives them an almost inhuman appearance. Yet their neck plates may become so heavily covered that they resemble armor rather than flesh. Their arms and legs develop ridges of calcified growth that follow the major muscle groups. In extreme cases, veteran sergeants and company masters may appear more shark than human, their faces developing subtle changes in structure that make them appear more predatory, their teeth becoming slightly more prominent, their features sharpening into something designed for hunting rather than human interaction. This progressive transformation raises questions about the Carcharodons' long-term genetic stability. Unlike most Space Marine chapters, where physical characteristics remain relatively constant throughout a warrior's life, the Carcharodons seem to become more monstrous with age. This could be evidence of gene seed degradation, as mutations accumulating over the centuries of the chapter's existence. Or it could be something more deliberate, a designed feature of their genetic legacy intended to make them more effective as hunters, more intimidating as executioners. Perhaps the original architects of their gene seed, whoever they were, intended for the Carcharodons to become more alien with time, to distance themselves psychologically from the humans they protect through physical transformation. But the Carcharodons' genetic legacy extends beyond mere physical appearance. They also suffer from a psychological condition they call the blindness, a combat frenzy that can overtake them during battle and cause them to lose all control. During these episodes, a Carcharodon becomes a pure engine of destruction, attacking everything in range with no distinction between friend and foe. The blindness strips away all higher reasoning, all tactical consideration, leaving only the most primal imperative to kill, 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 until nothing remains standing. This condition is remarkably similar to psychological traits associated with two different primarchs. The World Eaters were infamous for their combat rages, particularly after the implantation of the Butcher's nails, aggressive psychosurgery that turned them into killing machines at the cost of their sanity. While the Carcharodons do not have such implants, the similarity of their blindness to the World Eaters' frenzy has led some to speculate about possible genetic connections. Meanwhile, the Raven Guard have their own history of psychological instability, and particularly in the aftermath of Corax's failed experiments, when some of the chapter's warriors exhibited signs of degenerative mental conditions. The existence of the blindness within the Carcharodons suggests several possibilities. It could be evidence of gene seed instability, a flaw in their genetic legacy that manifests as psychological breakdown under the stress of combat. It could be an inherited trait from multiple gene seed sources, if the chapter is indeed chimeric, as some theories suggest. Or, most disturbingly, it could be a deliberate feature, something designed into their gene seed by whoever created them, a way to make them more savage, more ruthless, more willing to pursue combat to its absolute conclusion without hesitation or mercy. The chapter has developed protocols to manage the blindness, as systems of training and discipline designed to minimize its occurrence and control its effects when it does manifest. Younger battle brothers are taught to recognize the warning signs, the subtle changes in perception and emotion that precede a full episode. Veterans learn to channel the frenzy, to direct it at the enemy, rather than allowing it to become completely indiscriminate. Chaplains and librarians monitor their brothers during combat, watching for signs that someone is losing control and ready to intervene before tragedy occurs. Despite these precautions, incidents still occur, particularly during the most intense battles when the line between controlled aggression and berserker rage becomes dangerously thin. The management of the blindness has become part of the chapter's culture, woven into their traditions and identity. Or to succumb to the blindness and harm a battle brother is considered a profound shame, a failure of discipline that can follow a warrior for the rest of his service. Yet there is also a recognition that the blindness represents power, a reservoir of fury that can be tapped when the situation demands absolute violence. The most skilled Carcharodon warriors learn to walk the edge, to allow themselves to approach the blindness without fully surrendering to it, using its energy and aggression while retaining just enough control to avoid attacking their own. Beyond these obvious physical and psychological traits, the Carcharodon's gene seed seems to confer other, more subtle characteristics. There are reports, unconfirmed but persistent, that suggest Carcharodons have enhanced senses in darkness, or able to function in low-light conditions more effectively than other space marines. This would be consistent with both Raven Guard heritage, whose Primarch Corvus Corax was known for his ability to seemingly become one with shadows, and with the chapter's role as void hunters, operating in the darkness between stars where normal visual acuity would be of limited value. Some accounts also suggest that Carcharodons have an enhanced ability to hold their breath and function in low-oxygen environments, though this too remains unverified by Imperial biologist studies. If true, it would be another adaptation suited to void warfare and boarding actions, allowing the chapter to fight in compromised atmospheres, or even total vacuum, for longer than other space marines, who are themselves already far more resilient than baseline humans. While such an adaptation would make sense given the chapter's specialization in ship-to-ship combat and their tendency to target enemy vessels for boarding rather than destruction. The question of the Carcharodons' gene seed purity and origin becomes even more complex when we consider their relationship with the Ashen Claws, the renegade Raven Guard successors who operate beyond Imperial space. The two chapters maintain a complex trading relationship, with the Carcharodons providing fresh gene seed and equipment to the Ashen Claws in exchange for recruits and supplies. However, this relationship is marked by obvious tension and mutual suspicion. Yet the Ashen Claws explicitly question whether the Carcharodons' gene seed has been contaminated with what they call their disgusting breed, implying knowledge of or suspicion about chimeric genetic origins. This interaction tells us several things. First, that the Ashen Claws, who are confirmed Raven Guard descendants, do not fully recognize the Carcharodons as true brothers, despite superficial similarities. Second, that there is something about the Carcharodons' gene seed that the Ashen Claws find questionable or impure, suggesting origins beyond simple Raven Guard heritage. Third, that despite these concerns, both chapters are pragmatic enough to maintain their trading relationship, recognizing that survival in the outer darkness requires cooperation even between groups who might prefer to have nothing to do with each other. The practical implications of the Carcharodons' genetic legacy are profound. Their ability to recruit from any world they conquer, rather than maintaining a specific recruiting world or drawing from a particular cultural background, is both an advantage and a challenge. On one hand, it means they can constantly replenish their numbers regardless of where their hunting takes them. On the other, it means that every new recruit brings a different cultural background, different expectations, different understanding of what it means to be a warrior. The gene seed must work harder to override these differences, to create unity out of diversity, to forge 1,000 different origins into a single cultural identity. But the result is a chapter whose culture is defined more by the gene seed itself than by any particular homeworld or recruiting tradition, where blood angels are shaped by the artistic and noble traditions of Baal, and space wolves carry the savage warrior ethos of Fenris into their service. Carcharodons are shaped almost entirely by their genetic legacy and their role. They become creatures of the void because their gene seed makes them suited to it. They become silent hunters because their mutations make them terrifying to look upon and thus more effective when operating in stealth. They become ruthless because their blindness teaches them that hesitation can lead to catastrophic loss of control. In this sense, the Carcharodons may represent the most pure expression of what the Emperor intended when he created the Space Marines. They are warriors whose identity is inseparable from their function, whose very biology drives them toward their assigned role. There is no questioning their purpose. No philosophical debate about whether they serve the right master or fight for the right cause. They hunt because they were made to hunt. They kill because they were designed to kill. The gene seed is not merely a tool that enables their service, but the foundation of their entire existence. Yet this genetic determinism comes with a cost. The Carcharodons are increasingly isolated from baseline humanity, their mutations and psychological conditions making them less relatable, less human with each passing year of service. Where other Space Marines can at least theoretically return to human society, can interact with civilian populations with some degree of normalcy. But the Carcharodons are monsters even to those they protect. Their black eyes and death-white skin mark them as fundamentally other, while their tendency toward berserker rage makes them dangerous to be around, even when they are not actively engaged in combat. This isolation is reinforced by their physical transformation over time. A young Carcharodon, newly elevated to full Battle Brother status, might still pass for merely an unusually pale Space Marine. But an ancient veteran, covered in shark-like denticles, his features altered by centuries of gene seed influence, becomes something else entirely. He is a living weapon, a creature whose humanity has been almost entirely subsumed by his role as a killer. This transformation is visible, undeniable, irreversible. There is no returning from what they become, and no path back to anything resembling normal existence. Perhaps this is fitting. The Carcharodons hunt in the outer darkness, in regions where humanity cannot survive without extraordinary measures. They face enemies that would break ordinary men's minds, that challenge the very concept of sanity and reason.
Okay, real talk for a second. The Carcharodons are probably my favorite chapter, that I would absolutely never want to meet in person. Like, if I was some Imperial citizen or on a random world and I saw those gray-clad giants with the dead eyes show up, I'd be praying they're here for someone else. Because even if they're technically the good guys, there's nothing good about what they do or how they do it. But that's exactly why they're so compelling, right? In most 40k stories, Space Marines are these larger-than-life heroes, noble warriors defending humanity. The Carcharodons are defending humanity too, but they're doing it in places where nobody's watching, against enemies most people don't even know exist, and using methods that would get them censored if anyone important actually saw them in action. They're like the Imperium's worst kept secret, this force that everybody kind of knows but nobody really wants to acknowledge, because acknowledging them means admitting that sometimes humanity's survival requires monsters on our side too. And honestly, that's way more interesting than another chapter of noble knights in space. But anyways, let's get back to the story.
To fight such enemies requires warriors who have themselves moved beyond normal human psychological limits, who have become as alien as the void they patrol. Their genetic legacy, with all its mutations and psychological complications, may be exactly what allows them to function in environments and situations that would destroy other chapters. The gene seed is destiny for all Space Marines, but for the Carcharodons, it is everything. It determines their appearance, their psychology, their role, their culture, their ultimate fate. They are prisoners of their biology, warriors whose every action is shaped by genetic imperatives implanted 10,000 years ago, by architects whose identities and intentions remain shrouded in mystery. To be a Carcharodon is to be consumed by the shark, to surrender your humanity piece by piece until all that remains is the hunter, eternal and remorseless, prowling the depths of space for prey that will never run out, and a duty that will never be completed. Section 3. Life in the Void. The Carcharodons are a fleet-based chapter, but this simple designation fails to capture the true nature of their existence. They are not merely a chapter without a homeworld, not simply Space Marines who happen to operate from ships, rather than a planetary fortress monastery. The Carcharodons are creatures of the void in a way that few other chapters can claim. Warriors whose entire culture and identity has been shaped by 10,000 years of endless travel through the darkest regions of space. They are as much a part of their ships as the ships are part of them. And to understand the Carcharodons, one must first understand the vessels that serve as their homes, their fortresses, their means of waging war across the galaxy. At the heart of the Carcharodons' fleet lies the Nikor, their flagship and the nearest thing the chapter has to a true home. The Nikor is a Grand Cruiser, a ship classification that dates back to the Great Crusade, when the Imperium built vessels on a scale rarely seen in the modern era. Grand Cruisers are smaller than true battleships, but larger and more powerful than standard cruisers, combining heavy armament with voidworthiness, sufficient to operate for extended periods far from Imperial supply lines. They are rare in the 41st millennium, most having been lost to war, accident, or the simple entropy of 10 millennia of service. That the Carcharodons possess one speaks to their ancient origins and their importance to whatever authority originally dispatched them into the outer darkness. The Nikor is more than just a warship, though it excels in that role. It serves as the chapter's fortress monastery, housing the chapter master's chambers, the Librarius, the Reclusium, where chaplains minister to the spiritual needs of the battle brothers, and the vast training halls where aspirants learn the ways of war. Deep within its armored hull lie the precious gene seed vaults, where the chapter's genetic legacy is preserved, along with the Medici chambers, where apothecaries work to transform human boys into space marines. The ship contains forges where tech marines repair and maintain the chapter's equipment, armories holding weapons dating back to the Great Crusade, and chapels where warriors contemplate their duty before the Emperor. But the Nikor is also a grim place, shaped by the same brutality that defines the chapter itself. Its corridors are dimly lit, designed for warriors whose black eyes see better in darkness than in light. Its walls are decorated not with glorious murals or inspirational inscriptions, but with trophies taken from defeated enemies. Skulls mounted on spikes, flayed hides stretched across frames, weapons claimed from fallen foes. The ship's interior atmosphere is kept cold, colder than most Imperial vessels maintain, approaching temperatures that would be uncomfortable even for augmented space marines. This is deliberate, a way of keeping the warriors sharp, reminding them constantly that comfort is weakness, that the void is merciless, that only the strong survive. The crew of the Nikor reflects the chapter's character as well. Where many Space Marine chapters maintain human chapter serfs who serve willingly, often descendants of the chapter's recruiting world, who view their service as a great honor. The Carcharodon serfs are mostly taken by force. Many are conscripts harvested during the chapter's raids on Imperial worlds, young men deemed unfit for transformation into Space Marines, but suitable for service in support roles. And others are survivors of conquered enemy populations, pressed into service as a form of punishment or redemption. They serve in fear rather than pride, knowing that failure means death, and that the grey-clad giants they serve are as likely to kill them for incompetence as any enemy. This creates an atmosphere of constant tension aboard the Nikor and the chapter's other vessels. The serfs move through the corridors in silence, speaking only when absolutely necessary, keeping their eyes downcast when Space Marines pass. They perform their duties with desperate efficiency, knowing that attracting attention is dangerous, that standing out in any way might result in becoming an example for others. Some of the older serfs have served long enough to become almost invisible, are able to move through the ship completing their tasks without the Space Marines even noticing their presence. These veterans teach the newer conscripts the most important rule of survival: be competent, be invisible, be silent. Beyond the Nikor, the Carcharodons' fleet consists of numerous smaller vessels. Strike cruisers serve as mobile headquarters for individual companies, each capable of operating independently for extended periods. Battle barges provide heavy firepower and transport capability, able to deploy entire companies directly into combat zones. Rapid strike vessels and destroyers serve as scouts and raiders, fast ships designed for hit-and-run attacks against enemy supply lines and isolated targets. The exact size and composition of the fleet is unknown, as the chapter has never submitted complete records to Imperial authorities, but estimates based on observed deployments suggest the Carcharodons command a formidable naval force, larger than many chapters maintain. All of these vessels share certain characteristics. They are old, some dating back 10,000 years to the Great Crusade itself. Their hulls bear the scars of countless battles, repaired and re-repaired so many times that original construction is barely visible beneath layers of patches and additions. They operate with ancient technology, using systems that most other Imperial forces would consider barely functional, making do with equipment that should have been replaced millennia ago. Yet somehow, through the skill of the chapter's tech marines and the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years of void warfare, they remain operational, still deadly, still capable of striking fear into any enemy who encounters them. The interior spaces of these vessels have been modified extensively over the millennia to suit the chapter's specific needs and preferences. Gravity generators are set lower than standard, creating an environment of reduced weight that allows the Space Marines to move more quickly and efficiently. Atmospheric processors are calibrated to maintain air composition at the edge of breathable, testing the warrior's resilience even during routine operations. Lighting systems provide only minimal illumination, creating perpetual twilight that would leave baseline humans stumbling blind, but allows Carcharodons to see perfectly well. As these modifications make the ships uncomfortable or even dangerous for normal humans, but ideal for warriors whose physiology has been shaped by gene seed to excel in harsh conditions. Navigation presents unique challenges for the Carcharodons fleet. The chapter operates primarily in regions beyond the Astronomican's reliable reach, venturing into the darkness above the galactic plane and the void between spiral arms where the Emperor's psychic lighthouse cannot guide them. They must rely instead on ancient navigation techniques, following stellar phenomena, using gravitational lensing to calculate position, employing their navigator's ability to read the warp with minimal guiding light. This requires exceptional skill from the navigator houses that provide them with psychic pilots. And it is said that only the most experienced or most desperate navigators will agree to serve aboard Carcharodon vessels, knowing that the posting means years or even decades in the outer darkness with only the faintest hope of ever returning to Imperial space. Communication with the wider Imperium is similarly challenging. The chapter operates beyond the range of normal astropathic transmission for extended periods, unable to send or receive messages from Imperial command. When they do establish contact, it is often cryptic and brief, terse communiques that provide minimal information about the chapter's status or activities. This isolation is both tactical advantage and operational challenge. It allows the Carcharodons to operate without oversight, to employ methods that might be questioned if directly observed, and to pursue their own interpretation of their mandate without interference. But it also means they cannot call for help when situations deteriorate, cannot coordinate with other Imperial forces, cannot receive updated intelligence about threats and priorities. The chapter has adapted to this isolation by becoming completely self-sufficient. Their ships carry forges capable of producing ammunition, weapons, armor components, and replacement parts for almost any system. They maintain hydroponic facilities for food production, though most Carcharodons subsist primarily on combat rations and processed nutrients, rather than anything resembling proper meals. Medical facilities aboard the larger vessels rival those of planetary hospitals, thus allowing apothecaries to perform complex surgeries and treat injuries that would require specialized facilities for other chapters. Most remarkably, the fleet includes gene seed processing facilities, allowing the chapter to harvest, store, and implant gene seed without ever needing to return to Imperial space for resupply. This self-sufficiency extends to recruitment. The Carcharodons do not maintain a homeworld or traditional recruiting worlds. Instead, they practice what they call the Red Tithe, descending on Imperial or recently conquered worlds to harvest young men for transformation into Space Marines. These raids are conducted with the same ruthless efficiency that characterizes all Carcharodon operations. They arrive without warning, identify suitable candidates through methods known only to the chapter, and take them regardless of local objections or pleas. The selected youths are brought aboard the fleet, tested through brutal trials that kill the vast majority, and the survivors begin the transformation into Space Marines. The training of new Carcharodons occurs entirely within the fleet, in specialized areas of the larger vessels where aspirants learn the arts of war under the tutelage of veteran battle brothers. The training is brutal, even by Space Marine standards, designed to break the recruits psychologically before rebuilding them as members of the chapter. Aspirants fight each other in gladiatorial combat, with the losers often dying and their gene seed being harvested for future use. They are subjected to sensory deprivation, kept in absolute darkness for days or weeks at a time to teach them to function without sight. They are exposed to vacuum, to extreme cold, to every harsh condition they might encounter in void warfare, their tolerance tested to and beyond breaking point. Those who survive this process emerge as scouts, the youngest members of the chapter who have completed their transformation but not yet proven themselves in battle. Scout training in the Carcharodons is extensive, lasting years or even decades before the warrior is deemed ready for promotion to full battle brother status. This extended apprenticeship serves multiple purposes. It allows the chapter to evaluate each warrior's temperament and abilities, to identify those who might be suitable for specialized roles like apothecary or tech marine training. It builds absolute loyalty to the chapter and its ways, eroding any attachment to the recruit's former life and identity. And it ensures that only the most capable survive to join the chapter's ranks, maintaining the quality of the force despite their isolation and constant attrition. Life aboard the ships follows a rigid schedule designed to maintain the warriors in peak combat readiness, even during extended voyages. Days are divided into training periods, maintenance duties, prayer and meditation sessions, and brief periods of rest. There is no leisure time as other chapters might understand it, no recreation or entertainment. The only breaks in routine come from combat itself, which is treated almost as a relief from the tedium of shipboard existence. This grinding routine, maintained for decades or centuries, creates warriors who are psychologically prepared for the monotony of void travel, who can endure years of boredom, punctuated by brief periods of extreme violence, without losing effectiveness or discipline. The chapter's fleet structure reflects their tactical doctrine. Rather than keeping all forces concentrated in a single massive fleet, the Carcharodons disperse their vessels across vast regions of space, with individual ships or small squadrons operating independently for extended periods. This allows them to cover more territory, to respond to threats across a wider area, to ensure that no enemy action in the outer darkness goes unnoticed and unpunished. But it also means that individual companies, or even squads, may go years without seeing other members of their chapter, operating in complete isolation with only their own resources and judgment to rely upon. This distributed deployment creates a culture of extreme self-reliance within the chapter. Company masters, and even sergeants, must be capable of making strategic decisions normally reserved for chapter masters of other forces. They must be diplomats when necessary, judges when civilians need governance, strategists when planning campaigns, and executioners when duty demands it. The burden of command in the Carcharodons is heavier than in most chapters, and the consequence of failure more immediate and final. There is no calling for reinforcements, no appealing to higher authority, no second chances. Each ship and its complement of Space Marines stands or falls on its own merits. Yet despite this dispersion, the chapter maintains cohesion through several mechanisms. The most important is the system of assigned terminators from the first company. Lord Tiberos, the chapter master, maintains a practice of distributing veterans from his elite red brethren throughout the other companies. These warriors serve as the chapter master's eyes and ears, ensuring that company masters follow the chapter's strategic directives and do not deviate from accepted doctrine. They are also formidable force multipliers, Terminator-armored veterans whose presence can turn the tide of battle, but their primary role is surveillance and enforcement, a check on the autonomy that otherwise might lead to individual companies going rogue. Communication between vessels, when possible, is maintained through carefully choreographed rendezvous points. At predetermined times and locations, our elements of the fleet gather to exchange information, transfer supplies, and coordinate strategy. These gatherings also serve social functions, allowing warriors from different companies to interact, to share experiences and tactics, to remember that they are part of a larger whole. Dueling is common during these meetings, with warriors testing their skills against brothers from other companies in controlled combat that rarely results in permanent harm. These contests serve to establish dominance hierarchies, to identify the most skilled fighters, and to provide entertainment during what would otherwise be mere logistics meetings. The chapter's fleet-based existence has created a unique relationship with the Mechanicus. Unlike most chapters, which maintain relatively stable relationships with specific forge worlds and rely on those connections for equipment and support, the Carcharodons must scavenge and salvage most of what they need. They cannot afford to be particular about which forge worlds supply them or what patterns of equipment they receive. Their arsenals contain a bewildering variety of weapons and armor from different eras and manufacturers, everything held together by the skill of their tech marines and the blessings of the Omnissiah. This creates maintenance challenges, but also advantages, as the diversity of equipment means no single part failure can cripple the entire force. The tech marines themselves have evolved unique practices to cope with these challenges, rather than focusing on a single specialty, as tech marines in other chapters often do. Carcharodon tech marines must be generalists, capable of repairing anything from land raiders to plasma weapons to void shields. They have developed an almost instinctive understanding of machinery, able to diagnose problems through observation and fix them with whatever materials are available. Their machine spirits are different too, more flexible, more forgiving of improvisation. Where a Mars-blessed bolter might reject non-standard ammunition, a Carcharodon weapon will fire anything that fits in the chamber and trust its tech marine to sort out the consequences later. This pragmatic approach to technology extends to all aspects of the fleet's operation. Fuel is scavenged from destroyed enemy ships, from uncharted gas giants in empty systems, from anywhere it can be found. Spare parts are cannibalized from derelict vessels, torn from destroyed enemies, manufactured in the fleet's own forges using raw materials harvested from asteroids and dead worlds. Nothing is wasted, nothing discarded if it might someday prove useful. The Carcharodons are recyclers and salvagers on a massive scale, maintaining a vast war machine through constant improvisation and adaptation, rather than reliable supply lines and regular resupply. Yet for all their self-sufficiency and adaptation, the fleet shows signs of degradation that cannot be fully arrested. The ships are old, growing older with every year, and there are some damages that even the most skilled tech marine cannot fully repair. Bulkheads that should be replaced remain patched and weakened. Systems that should be upgraded continue operating on obsolete technology. Our weapons that should be condemned as unsafe remain in service because there are no replacements available. The fleet is slowly failing, dying by inches, and everyone aboard knows it. The question is not whether the ships will eventually fail, but whether the chapter's mission will be completed before that inevitable collapse occurs. This awareness of mortality, of operating on borrowed time, permeates the chapter's culture. There is an urgency to their operations, a recognition that every mission might be the last, that every enemy destroyed might be purchased at a cost the chapter cannot afford. This drives them to fight harder, to take risks that more conservative chapters would avoid, to maximize the damage they inflict while they still have the capability to do so. The Carcharodons are not fighting for glory or honor, but simply to fulfill their mission for as long as possible before the darkness claims them permanently. The void is home to the Carcharodons, but it is a harsh home that offers no comfort, no rest, no respite from duty. It is a home that slowly devours those who live within it, wearing them down year by year, century by century, until nothing remains but the mission itself. Perhaps this is why the chapter continues, why they have endured for 10,000 years, when logic suggests they should have been destroyed long ago. They are already part of the void, have become as merciless and eternal as the darkness they patrol. They will endure because they are already dead in every way that matters. Ghosts piloting ancient ships through empty space, are hunting enemies that will never run out in a war that will never end. The fleet sails on, silent and implacable, a collection of ancient vessels crewed by warriors who have forgotten what it means to have a home beyond these cold metal corridors. They are the hunters in darkness, the watchers in the void, and they will continue their vigil until the last ship finally fails, until the last space marine finally falls, and perhaps even then they will persist somehow, their duty transcending death itself, their mission outlasting even the warriors who began it. The void remembers its own, and the Carcharodons belong to the void forever, continuing with next sections. Section 4. The Silent War. The Carcharodons do not fight the way other Space Marine chapters fight. Yet they have developed over 10 millennia, a unique combat doctrine perfectly suited to their role as hunters in the outer darkness. A style of warfare that combines stealth, overwhelming violence, and psychological warfare into something that their enemies find almost impossible to counter. To face the Carcharodons in battle is to experience a form of horror that transcends normal military conflict, to discover that you are not fighting soldiers, but predators, that the battle was over before you even knew it had begun. The chapter's preferred method of engagement begins long before the first shot is fired. When the Carcharodons identify a target, whether an enemy fleet, a rebellious world, or an alien incursion, they do not immediately attack. Instead, they observe. Scout ships drift through the target system on silent running. Their reactors damped to minimal output, their sensor systems passive, gathering intelligence while remaining undetected. This observation period can last days, weeks, or even months, depending on the target's importance and the complexity of the situation. The Carcharodons are patient hunters who understand that knowledge is as important as firepower, that understanding your enemy's routines and weaknesses allows you to kill them more efficiently. During this phase, the chapter's librarians play a crucial role. These psychers do not simply read the warp for signs of chaos corruption or scry the future as librarians in other chapters might. Instead, they focus their powers on gathering intelligence, on reading the surface thoughts of enemy commanders, on sensing where defensive strongpoints and hidden reserves are located. Some Carcharodon librarians have developed abilities unique to their chapter, techniques that allow them to cloud enemy sensors, to make their ships appear as nothing more than stellar debris or cosmic background radiation. This psychic stealth multiplies the effectiveness of physical hiding, making the chapter's approach virtually undetectable until they choose to reveal themselves. When the time comes to strike, the Carcharodons attack with a precision and violence that shocks even veteran military forces. They do not announce their presence with challenge broadcasts or demands for surrender. There is no warning, no opportunity for the enemy to prepare a defense or organize a retreat. What the first indication that most targets have of a Carcharodon assault is when boarding pods slam into their ships or when drop pods crash through the roofs of their fortifications. By the time alarms begin sounding, grey-clad space marines are already inside the defensive perimeter, already killing, already completing their mission. The chapter specializes in several specific types of operation. Boarding actions are perhaps their most famous specialty. When the Carcharodons attack an enemy vessel, they do not waste time and ammunition on lengthy void combat. Instead, they close to boarding range as quickly as possible, launching torrents of boarding torpedoes and assault craft at the enemy ship. These boarding forces are typically led by Terminators, heavily armored veterans capable of carving through enemy defenses like a blade through flesh. Behind them come tactical squads, methodically clearing every corridor and compartment, killing any enemy they encounter without hesitation or mercy. The experience of being boarded by Carcharodons is, by all accounts, nightmarish. The Space Marines fight in near total silence, communicating through hand signals and encrypted microbursts rather than voice communication. This creates an eerie atmosphere where the only sounds are weapons fire, screaming, and the heavy tread of power-armored warriors. Survivors, on the rare occasions when any are left alive, report feeling hunted rather than fought, as though they were prey animals being stalked by patient predators. The psychological effect is devastating, causing enemy resistance to collapse far more quickly than the purely military situation would suggest. Drop pod assaults on planetary targets follow a similar pattern. The Carcharodons identify key targets, command centers, supply depots, the enemy's center of gravity, and concentrate their entire assault on those locations. The drop pods fall in near-perfect silence, their retro thrusters firing only at the last possible moment to slow their descent. When the pod's hatches blow open, the Space Marines emerge already firing, already moving, already deep within the enemy's defensive perimeter before any effective response can be organized. These assaults are timed with precision, multiple pods landing simultaneously to split the enemy's attention and prevent them from concentrating their defenses anywhere. The chapter makes extensive use of its scout companies during planetary operations. Carcharodon scouts are deployed ahead of the main force, sometimes days or weeks in advance, to gather intelligence and prepare the battlefield. These young warriors infiltrate enemy territory using stealth suits and chameleon cloaks, moving through hostile terrain without being detected, observing enemy movements and marking targets for destruction. When the main assault begins, these scouts serve as pathfinders and forward observers, guiding drop pods to optimal landing sites and calling down orbital strikes on targets of opportunity. In close combat, the Carcharodons are absolutely terrifying. They fight with a savage intensity that seems almost primal, using weapons designed for maximum damage at close range. Chainswords are preferred over power swords, their roaring teeth spraying blood and bone fragments with every stroke. Combat knives are used with brutal efficiency, stabbing and slashing with techniques designed not just to kill, but to maim, to make enemies scream in agony as they die, to terrorize anyone who hears those screams. The blindness can manifest during these close-quarters battles, turning individual Space Marines into whirlwinds of violence that kill everything in reach, regardless of whether they wear enemy colors or Imperial insignia. This emphasis on close combat extends to the chapter's equipment and organization. The Carcharodons field an unusually large number of assault squads, Space Marines equipped with jump packs and armed with close combat weapons. But these warriors specialize in hitting enemy formations from unexpected angles, dropping from the sky or emerging from hidden positions to attack vulnerable targets, like artillery crews or command units. Their attacks are timed to cause maximum confusion, often coinciding with broader assaults, to prevent enemies from responding effectively to multiple simultaneous threats. Terminators hold a special place in Carcharodon tactical doctrine. The chapter maintains a large number of tactical dreadnought armor suits, more than most chapters possess relative to their size. These suits are ancient, dating back thousands of years, and many have been extensively modified or repaired so many times that they barely resemble their original configuration. What they lack in aesthetic unity, they make up for in effectiveness. Carcharodon Terminators are deployed aggressively, used as shock troops to break through the hardest enemy defenses. They teleport directly into the heart of enemy positions or lead boarding actions against the most heavily defended targets, their massive armor allowing them to shrug off fire that would kill ordinary Space Marines. The first company, known as the Red Brethren, consists entirely of Terminator armored veterans. These are the chapter's most experienced warriors, survivors of centuries of combat in the outer darkness. They are led personally by Lord Tyberos, who commands them from the front rather than from the relative safety of a command ship. The sight of these warriors, their grey armor stained with the blood of countless enemies, their weapons ancient relics of the Great Crusade, is enough to break the morale of all but the most fanatical foes. They are death incarnate, implacable killers who have forgotten the meaning of mercy or hesitation. Despite their preference for close combat, the Carcharodons are not ignorant of ranged warfare. They maintain substantial stocks of heavy weapons and employ them with brutal efficiency when the tactical situation demands it. Heavy bolters lay down suppressing fire that shreds light infantry. Lascannons pick off armored vehicles from concealed positions. Missile launchers rain explosives on enemy concentrations. But these weapons are used primarily to enable close combat rather than as ends in themselves. The purpose of firepower in Carcharodon doctrine is to pin or slow enemies, making them easier targets for assault troops to reach and kill in melee. Where the chapter's use of armor and vehicles is similarly pragmatic. They maintain land raiders, rhino transports, and various other armored vehicles, using them primarily for mobility rather than as weapons platforms. The Carcharodons prefer their warriors to close with the enemy on foot or via drop pod, rather than advancing behind the armor of their tanks. Vehicles are used to exploit breakthroughs or to transport forces rapidly between objectives, but are rarely the focus of operations. This reflects both their void-based origins, where vehicle combat has limited application, and their philosophy that true warriors kill face-to-face, rather than from behind layers of metal. One of the most distinctive aspects of Carcharodon tactics is their use of terror. Where many Space Marine chapters try to inspire hope and courage in Imperial citizens while crushing enemy morale through displays of martial prowess, the Carcharodons make no distinction. They are terrifying to everyone, ally and enemy alike. This is partially unintentional, a side effect of their mutations and demeanor, but it is also weaponized. The chapter understands that enemies who are already afraid are easier to defeat, that troops who have heard stories about the grey-clad monsters who fight in silence and take no prisoners are more likely to break and run when those monsters actually appear. This psychological warfare extends to their treatment of conquered populations. When the Carcharodons take a world or defeat an enemy force, they do not simply accept surrender and move on. Instead, they make examples. All leaders who resisted are executed publicly and brutally. Populations that supported the enemy are decimated, with 1 in every 10 inhabitants killed, regardless of their individual guilt or innocence. These measures serve both practical and psychological purposes. They punish resistance, deter future rebellion, and remind everyone that defying the Imperium brings consequences worse than mere defeat. The chapter's strategic doctrine emphasizes flexibility and adaptation. While they have preferred methods and tactics, they are not dogmatic about their application. If a particular approach is not working, they rapidly shift to alternatives. If an enemy adapts to their tactics, they evolve new ones. This flexibility comes from their isolation and self-reliance. Fighting beyond the Imperium's borders means there is no opportunity to call for specialized support or reinforcement. Every problem must be solved with the resources at hand, and this necessity has bred an institutional culture of innovation and pragmatism. Coordination between different elements of a Carcharodon force is achieved through minimal communication. Orders are given at the campaign's outset, establishing objectives and basic parameters. After that, individual units are expected to use their own judgment to accomplish those objectives. Company masters and squad sergeants do not wait for detailed instructions before acting. They assess their local situation, identify opportunities or threats, and respond immediately. This creates an operational tempo that enemies find difficult to counter, with Carcharodon forces seeming to be everywhere simultaneously, responding to every enemy move before the enemy even realizes those moves have been observed. This decentralized command structure is made possible by the chapter's training and culture. Every Carcharodon warrior, from the youngest scout to the oldest veteran, has internalized the chapter's operational philosophy. They understand what the chapter values, what objectives are worth pursuing, what risks are acceptable. This shared understanding means that individual warriors can make decisions independently while still contributing to the overall mission, trusting that their brothers elsewhere in the battle space are doing the same, all working toward common goals, even without direct communication or coordination. The chapter's approach to objectives is pragmatic to the point of ruthlessness. Carcharodon doctrine holds that the mission comes before everything, including the lives of their own warriors, and certainly including the lives of Imperial civilians who might be in the way. If accomplishing an objective requires destroying an Imperial city with millions of inhabitants, the Carcharodons will do so without hesitation. If a mission can be completed more efficiently by sacrificing a squad or even an entire company, those warriors are considered expendable. This utilitarian calculus horrifies more conventional Imperial commanders, but reflects the realities of fighting in the outer darkness, where reinforcement is impossible, and failure means not just defeat, but the successful penetration of threats into Imperial space. Critics of the chapter, and there are many within the Imperium's military and ecclesiastical hierarchies, point to their methods as evidence of corruption, or at least dangerous deviation from proper Imperial doctrine. They note that the Carcharodons' willingness to cause civilian casualties, their use of terror tactics, their treatment of prisoners, all of these methods are suspiciously similar to those employed by traitor legions and renegade chapters. The counter-argument, made by those few within the Imperium who understand the chapter's true role, is that different enemies require different approaches. The threats that lurk beyond the galactic rim do not respect conventional military etiquette or spare civilians. To fight them requires warriors willing to match their brutality, to meet darkness with darkness. But the most troubling aspect of Carcharodon combat doctrine is how little it distinguishes between types of enemies. Whether facing heretics, xenos, or merely recalcitrant Imperial citizens who have delayed their tithes, the chapter employs essentially the same methods. There is no graduation of response, no proportionality of force. The Carcharodons approach every conflict as an existential threat that must be crushed with overwhelming violence. This makes them extraordinarily effective, but also means they are rarely deployed to situations requiring nuance or restraint. They are a hammer, and to them, every problem looks like a nail that needs to be driven home with savage force. In the end, Carcharodon combat doctrine can be summarized simply. Identify the enemy, close with the enemy, destroy the enemy utterly. Everything else is detail, a variation on this essential theme. They are hunters who have perfected the art of the kill over 10,000 years of practice. They are warriors who fight not for glory or recognition, but simply because that is what they were created to do, what their gene seed compels them toward, what their existence demands. The silence of their approach, the savagery of their assault, the thoroughness of their victory, these are the hallmarks of a chapter that has become one with its mission, that has transcended questions of right and wrong to focus only on effectiveness. They are the Emperor's sharks, and in the dark waters of the galaxy's edge, sharks have only one purpose: to hunt, to kill, to feed, to survive. Section 5. Tyberos, the Red Wake. In a chapter defined by monsters, Tyberos, the Red Wake, stands as the greatest monster of all. The current shade, Lord of the Carcharodons, Master of the battle barge Nikor, and commander of the elite first company known as the Red Brethren, Tyberos is a figure who inspires fear even among his own brothers. To understand the Carcharodons, one must first understand this towering warrior whose very existence seems to embody everything the chapter represents. Savage violence barely contained, ancient power barely comprehended, and a presence that transforms any battlefield he enters into an abattoir. Tyberos is massive even by the standards of space marines, warriors who are themselves giants among men. Where a typical Astartes stands around 7 to 8 feet tall, reports describe Tyberos as dwarfing even his battle brothers. Witnesses place his height at close to 9 feet, perhaps more when accounting for his archaic Terminator armor. His bulk is proportionate to his height, creating a figure of such imposing physical presence that baseline humans often freeze in terror simply at the sight of him. Even other Space Marines, warriors who know no fear, feel a primal unease when the Shade Lord turns his black eyes upon them. He is never seen without his Terminator armor, an ancient suit that predates the Horus Heresy and shows signs of extensive modification and repair. The armor's exact pattern is difficult to determine beneath layers of augmentation, damage, and personalization accumulated over unknown centuries of service. It is heavier than standard tactical dreadnought armor, reinforced with additional plating that makes it more resistant to damage but also more cumbersome. Yet Tyberos moves in this massive suit with a speed and agility that defies logic, fighting with a grace that seems impossible for someone of his size and the weight he carries. When Tyberos removes his helmet, the sight is described as nightmare-inducing. His face is corpse-white like all Carcharodons, but the resemblance to a corpse goes beyond mere coloration. The flesh of his face appears to have receded in places, exposing portions of his skull beneath in a bloodless grimace that suggests death rather than life. Some accounts describe half his face as being flayed, the skin and muscle gone to reveal bone beneath, though whether this is from ancient wounds that never properly healed or some peculiarity of his gene seed's effect is unknown. His eyes, when visible, are pits of absolute darkness, are lightless voids that give no hint of the thoughts or emotions behind them. But it is Tyberos's weapons that truly set him apart, the relics known as Hunger and Slake. These unique power weapons are unlike anything else in the Imperium's arsenals, combining multiple weapon systems into singular instruments of destruction. Each weapon is fundamentally a lightning claw, with multiple power field-wreathed talons extending from a massive gauntlet. But integrated into the inner portion of each gauntlet is something else, a chain F weapon with adamantium teeth that howl when activated, creating a secondary attack surface that can tear through armor even if the power field talons do not penetrate. The effect in combat is devastating. Tyberos can slash with the lightning claw talons, ripping through armor and flesh with ease, while simultaneously using the inner chainfist teeth to grind through anything that resists the initial cuts. He can punch with the entire weapon, driving both systems into an enemy simultaneously, crushing and cutting and tearing all at once. The weapons are so large and unwieldy that no normal Space Marine could use them effectively, requiring Tyberos's immense strength and the power systems of his Terminator armor to wield them at all. The history of Hunger and Slake adds another layer to their legend. According to chapter lore, these weapons once belonged to a Raven Guard unit, specifically the 18th chapter, that was later exiled by Corvus Corax and became the renegade Ashen Claws. During one of the rare trading meetings between the Carcharodons and the Ashen Claws, Tyberos was provoked into a duel with the Ashen Claws chapter master, Nehat Never. The duel was brutal, a contest between two warriors who had each survived millennia of combat. When it ended, Tyberos stood victorious, and he claimed Hunger and Slake as his trophy, symbols of his dominance and the Carcharodons' superiority over their renegade cousins. In battle, Tyberos is something beyond mere lethality. Survivors who have witnessed him fight describe a figure who moves too fast for his size, who seems to be everywhere at once, whose weapons leave nothing but carnage in their wake. He does not merely kill enemies, but destroys them, rendering them into component pieces with such thoroughness that identification becomes impossible. Blood follows him like a shadow, coating his armor, dripping from his weapons, pooling beneath his feet. And this is the origin of his title, the Red Wake. He leaves a trail of blood wherever he goes, a wake of red that marks his passage through the battlefield like a ship's wake marks its passage through water. Yet despite this tremendous violence, witnesses consistently note that Tyberos appears to be fighting with cold calculation rather than rage. Every blow is measured, every strike precisely targeted. He does not waste motion or expend unnecessary energy. His fighting style is efficient, ruthless, optimized for killing as many enemies as quickly as possible, while minimizing risk to himself. This controlled brutality is somehow more terrifying than berserker fury would be. It suggests a mind that remains clear and calculating, even while performing acts of horrific violence. A consciousness that has accepted butchery as simply another task to be performed with maximum efficiency. The few times Tyberos has spoken in the presence of those outside his chapter, his voice is described as soft, almost a whisper, yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority and threat. He does not waste words any more than he wastes motion. His communications are terse, stripped to essential information, devoid of social niceties or diplomatic language. When he gives an order, it is obeyed not because of his rank, but because the alternative, displeasing the Red Wake, is unthinkable. His whisper carries more menace than other warriors' battle cries, each word weighted with the promise of violence should his will be thwarted. Tyberos maintains complete control over the Carcharodons through a combination of fear, respect, and strategic positioning. As Shade Lord, he holds ultimate authority over the chapter's strategic direction and operations. As Master of the Nikor, he commands the chapter's flagship and the considerable resources it represents. As commander of the First Company, he directly leads the chapter's most elite warriors, the Red Brethren, whose loyalty to him is absolute. But beyond these official positions, Tyberos exercises control through his practice of distributing First Company veterans throughout the other companies to serve as his personal representatives. These distributed veterans, still members of the First Company, but temporarily attached to other formations, serve multiple purposes. They are force multipliers, elite warriors, whose presence makes any unit they join more formidable. They are tactical advisors, veterans whose centuries of experience provide guidance to younger company masters. But most importantly, they are Tyberos's eyes and enforcers. They observe the other companies, reporting on their activities and ensuring that company masters follow the chapter's strategic directives. Should a company master consider going rogue or deviating from Tyberos's plans, these veterans serve as a check on such ambitions, warriors whose loyalty to the Shade Lord supersedes any other consideration. This system of distributed authority allows Tyberos to maintain control over a chapter that operates across vast distances with minimal communication. Company masters must consider that any order they give, any tactical decision they make, is being observed by representatives of the First Company. This creates a culture of compliance and adherence to doctrine, even when direct oversight is impossible. It is a system built on trust and fear in equal measure, trust that the veterans will accurately assess situations, fear of what will happen if their reports to Tyberos suggest incompetence or disloyalty. Under Tyberos's leadership, the Carcharodons have maintained their operational effectiveness despite the constant attrition of their mission. He has proven to be not just a skilled warrior, but also a capable strategist and administrator, managing the chapter's resources with the same ruthless efficiency he brings to combat. Under his guidance, the Red Tithes have been carefully planned to maximize recruitment while minimizing political backlash. The chapter's fleet has been maintained and even expanded through strategic salvage and acquisition. Relations with the Ashen Claws, tense as they are, have been managed to the chapter's benefit. Yet there are hints that Tyberos carries burdens beyond those visible to external observers. The chapter's serfs and younger battle brothers speak in whispers about times when the Shade Lord has been heard speaking to empty air, as though conversing with unseen presences. The Red Brethren veterans maintain absolute silence on the subject, suggesting that whatever Tyberos experiences during these moments is not for outsiders to know or question. Some theories suggest he communicates psionically with distant elements of the chapter, maintaining awareness of operations across vast distances. Others suggest something darker, as communion with entities or presences that should not be contacted at all. The full extent of Tyberos's combat capabilities remains unclear because so few of his opponents survive to report on them. What can be confirmed is that he has personally killed enemy champions from multiple Xenos species and numerous traitor space marines. accumulating a tally of victories that would be impressive for an entire squad, much less a single warrior. He has boarded enemy ships that entire companies could not crack, broken through defensive lines that were supposed to be impregnable, defeated enemy commanders in single combat when all tactical logic suggested he should have been overwhelmed. During the Badab War, the conflict that brought the Carcharodons to wider imperial attention, Tyberos demonstrated his capabilities on a scale that left even veteran Space Marine commanders impressed and disturbed. He led boarding actions against rebel Space Marine vessels, carving through defenders with hunger and slake, while his red brethren followed in his wake. He commanded ground operations against fortified positions, directing his forces with a strategic acumen that belied the savage nature of the fighting. He negotiated with inquisitors and other chapter masters, presenting the Carcharodons' credentials and securing their role in the campaign with a combination of ancient legal documents and barely veiled threats. One of the most famous accounts of Tyberos in action comes from the latter stages of the Badab War, during the assault on Badab Primaris itself. The Carcharodons were assigned to destroy the planet's hive cities, while other loyalist forces attacked the rebel stronghold directly. Tyberos led his forces into the heart of the largest hive, fighting through corridors and chambers designed to favor defenders. Witnesses from other chapters describe him as a walking catastrophe, a one-man army who killed everything that stood before him. The rebels threw entire companies at him, deployed heavy weapons and armored vehicles, and collapsed tunnels in attempts to bury him. Nothing worked. Tyberos simply adapted to each new obstacle and continued advancing, unstoppable and relentless, until the hive's defensive coordination completely collapsed. But perhaps the most telling incident regarding Tyberos's nature occurred after the war. During the Carcharodons' harvest of recruits from the Mantis warriors' former territory. When the Carcharodons descended on the Tranquility system to claim their tithe, they forced the system's young men to fight each other to the death, with only the survivors being deemed worthy of transformation into Space Marines. This brutal practice horrified other Imperial forces, but Tyberos was unmoved by their objections. When questioned by a Fire Angels captain about the morality of forcing children to murder each other, Tyberos's response was simple. We need warriors, not philosophers. Those who survive have proven they possess the will to live. Those who do not survive were never suitable. This exchange encapsulates Tyberos's philosophy, and, by extension, the philosophy that defines the entire Carcharodons chapter. There is no room for sentiment, no space for moral questioning, no tolerance for weakness or hesitation. The mission requires warriors, and warriors must be forged through violence and survival. To question this is to fundamentally misunderstand what the Carcharodons are and what they must do to fulfill their ancient mandate. Tyberos embodies this principle absolutely. He is what the chapter needs him to be, a warrior without doubt, a commander without mercy, a presence that exemplifies the cost of 10,000 years in the darkness. Yet there are moments when hints of something else emerge, brief glimpses of the man beneath the monster. The Red Brethren, when they think they are unobserved, show Tyberos a degree of loyalty that goes beyond mere military discipline or fear. Yet they follow him not just because he commands them, but because they trust him, believe in him, would die for him without hesitation. This suggests that Tyberos, for all his brutality and monstrousness, must possess some quality that inspires genuine devotion rather than merely compelling obedience through intimidation. Similarly, there are accounts of Tyberos showing what might generously be called consideration for his warriors' well-being. He does not waste their lives needlessly, does not spend them frivolously to achieve marginal objectives. When the situation demands sacrifice, he is ruthless in making that demand. But when objectives can be achieved without unnecessary casualties, he demonstrates a tactical flexibility and willingness to adapt that saves lives. For a chapter that operates in such isolation, where every loss is difficult to replace, this careful husbanding of resources is not mere efficiency, but a form of care, a recognition that his warriors are valuable and should be preserved when possible. The mystery of Tyberos extends even to his age and origins. No records exist of his elevation to Shade Lord. No documentation of his service before assuming command of the chapter. He simply has apparently always been, the master of the Carcharodons, as far as anyone outside the chapter knows. This raises troubling questions. How long has he held this position? How many centuries, or even millennia, has he led the chapter? Space Marines are functionally immortal, barring death in combat, but there are limits to even their endurance. The oldest recorded Space Marines show signs of degradation after 5 or 6 centuries, and requiring increasing medical support and eventually interment in dreadnought chassis to continue serving. Tyberos shows no signs of such degradation despite the ancient nature of his equipment and the references to him in records that date back centuries. This suggests either that he is younger than his apparent status would indicate, having risen to command with unusual speed, or that he possesses some quality or receives some treatment that allows him to remain functional far longer than should be possible. Some of the more heretical theories whispered in inquisitorial chambers suggest that Tyberos might not be a single individual at all, that the title of Shade Lord and the identity of Tyberos the Red Wake might be passed from one warrior to another in secret succession, maintaining the illusion of an eternal commander to provide stability to the chapter. Whatever the truth of his nature and history, Tyberos the Red Wake remains one of the most formidable chapter masters currently serving the Imperium. He is a warrior who has mastered the art of killing on a personal level, while simultaneously demonstrating strategic acumen that allows him to command chapter-level operations. He is a leader who inspires absolute loyalty in his followers while terrifying everyone else. He is a symbol of everything the Carcharodons represent: ancient, brutal, effective, and utterly dedicated to their mission regardless of the cost. To face Tyberos in battle is to understand true terror. To serve under him is to know that your life is valued only insofar as it contributes to the mission. Or to stand beside him is to witness violence elevated to an art form, killing performed with such skill that it transcends mere brutality to become something almost beautiful in its efficiency. He is the Red Wake, and in his wake comes only death, destruction, and the vindication of the Emperor's judgment on a galaxy that too often forgets that humanity's survival depends on warriors willing to do the unthinkable, to become monsters, so that others may remain human. Section 6. The Badab War. The Badab War stands as perhaps the most defining campaign in the modern history of the Carcharodons. The conflict that dragged them from obscurity into the light and revealed their nature to the wider Imperium. This brutal civil war, fought between loyalist and secessionist Space Marine chapters in the Maelstrom zone of Segmentum Ultima, would last over a decade and cost thousands of Space Marine lives. The Carcharodons' role in this conflict would cement their reputation as both supremely effective warriors and deeply troubling allies whose methods pushed the boundaries of what even the Imperium considers acceptable. The war's origins lay in the ambitions of Luft Huron, chapter master of the Astral Claws and ruler of the Badab sector. Over several centuries, Huron had built the Astral Claws into a powerful military force and established himself as the effective governor of the Maelstrom Zone, a strategically vital region plagued by warp storms and hostile Xenos. His successes earned him considerable autonomy from the Imperium's normal oversight, but also bred arrogance and a desire for even greater power. Or when the Administratum demanded that he resume paying tithes of gene seed and resources that he had been withholding, Huron refused. What followed was a cascade of escalation that would ultimately tear the region apart. By 910 M41, the conflict had raged for nearly a decade. Huron had convinced 3 other Space Marine chapters, the Lamenters, Mantis Warriors, and Executioners, to join his rebellion against what he portrayed as imperial oppression. Arrayed against them were numerous loyalist chapters dispatched to restore imperial authority. The war had settled into a brutal stalemate, with neither side able to achieve a decisive advantage. Then, Without warning or announcement, the Carcharodons arrived. The chapter's fleet emerged from the void at the edge of the Golgothan wastes, as a region of spatial anomalies and dangerous warp currents. Their sudden appearance caused immediate alarm among both loyalist and secessionist forces. No one had requested reinforcement from the Carcharodons. Indeed, most Imperial commanders present had never even heard of the chapter, and those few who had knowledge of them from ancient records considered that knowledge barely credible. The arrival of an unknown Space Marine chapter of considerable strength, appearing without orders in the middle of a delicate military situation, raised immediate concerns about their loyalties and intentions. Lord Commander Carib Cullen of the Red Scorpions, who held supreme command of the Loyalist forces, initially treated the Carcharodons with suspicion, bordering on hostility. He ordered his forces to prepare for possible combat, while demanding that the newcomers identify themselves and explain their presence. The response came from Tyberos himself, who requested permission to enter the war zone using formal protocols that dated back millennia. The Shade Lord presented notices patent, ancient legal documents affirming the Carcharodons' status as a legitimate chapter and granting them broad authority to operate as they saw fit, signed by High Lords of Terror and Inquisitors who had been dead for thousands of years. These documents placed Cullen in a difficult position. The Carcharodons' legal status appeared legitimate, their paperwork technically correct despite its age, yet their methods, equipment, and demeanor suggested a chapter that had spent too long operating beyond normal Imperial oversight. The decisive factor came when Tyberos voluntarily submitted to psychic probing by the Inquisitor legate overseeing the campaign, allowing Imperial psychers to verify his loyalty and intentions. The scan confirmed that Tyberos and his warriors were indeed loyal to the Emperor and the Imperium, bearing no taint of chaos corruption despite their disturbing appearance and methods. Cullen accepted the Carcharodons into his forces, though he remained wary of them throughout the campaign. His suspicions were not entirely unfounded. The Carcharodons had not come to the Bardab War out of duty or in response to Imperial orders. They had come because they saw an opportunity. The conflict had weakened several Space Marine chapters, making them vulnerable to exploitation. More importantly, yet it provided the Carcharodons with a chance to claim recruits and resources from worlds that would normally be off-limits to them. They were here to feed, to hunt, to take what they needed to sustain their chapter, and if doing so happened to align with the Imperium's interests, so much the better. Cullen's first assignment for the Carcharodons was a test of their capabilities and their willingness to follow orders. He directed them to attack the Endymion cluster, territory controlled by the Mantis Warriors, one of the rebel chapters. The objective was twofold: punish the Mantis Warriors for their rebellion and force them to engage Loyalist forces in open combat rather than continuing their hit-and-run tactics. What the Carcharodons did in response shocked even veterans who had fought through nearly a decade of civil war. The Endymion cluster consisted of dozens of worlds, most of them only lightly inhabited but strategically important for supply lines and communications. The Mantis Warriors drew recruits from these worlds and used them as bases for their guerrilla campaign against Loyalist forces. The Carcharodons descended on these worlds like a plague. They did not merely attack military targets or attempt to capture strategic locations. Instead, they implemented a scorched earth policy of shocking brutality. Planet after planet was subjected to systematic destruction. Infrastructure was bombed from orbit. Population centers were attacked without warning. Civilians suspected of supporting the Mantis Warriors were executed en masse. The Carcharodons made no distinction between combatants and non-combatants, but between active resistance and mere passive support. If a world had provided anything to the Mantis Warriors, supplies, intelligence, recruits, that world was marked for destruction. The campaign was genocide on a regional scale, millions dying to force a single Space Marine chapter into open battle. The strategy worked. The Mantis Warriors, bound by their honor and unable to stand by, while entire populations were slaughtered in their name, were forced to abandon their guerrilla tactics and engage the Carcharodons directly. The resulting battles were savage affairs, where the Mantis warriors' skill at ambush and mobility warfare meant little against an enemy that simply refused to be deterred by casualties or tactical setbacks. The Carcharodons ground them down through relentless aggression, attacking without pause, without mercy, but without any consideration for anything beyond the destruction of their opponents. The climactic engagement occurred at Endymion Prime, the Mantis warriors' primary stronghold in the cluster. The Carcharodons launched a massive assault, committing nearly their entire force to cracking the defenders' fortifications. The battle raged for weeks, both sides taking horrific casualties as they fought over ruined cities and shattered fortresses. In the end, superior numbers and the Carcharodons' willingness to accept any losses necessary to achieve victory gave them the advantage. The Mantis warriors were effectively destroyed as a fighting force, their chapter reduced to a few hundred survivors who would spend the next century on a penitent crusade, attempting to atone for their rebellion. The Carcharodons' casualties were also severe. While they had lost thousands of warriors in the campaign, deaths that would normally take decades or centuries to replace, but they had achieved something that other loyalist forces had failed to do. They had broken one of the rebel chapters and opened the way for a final assault on Huron's stronghold. Their effectiveness, brutal as it was, impressed the loyalist command, even as it disturbed them. The Fire Angels, another loyalist chapter that had fought alongside the Carcharodons during the campaign, were so horrified by their methods that they withdrew from the war entirely. Unable to continue serving alongside warriors they considered barely better than the traitors they were fighting. Cullen, despite his misgivings, recognized that the Carcharodons were too effective to sideline. He assigned them a crucial role in the final assault on Badab Primaris, the capital world of Huron's realm. While the Star Phantoms and other loyalist chapters attacked Huron's fortress palace directly, the Carcharodons were tasked with destroying the planet's hive cities and industrial infrastructure, crippling the rebel forces' support base and preventing Huron from reinforcing his position. The Carcharodons interpreted these orders with their characteristic thoroughness. Rather than merely damaging the hives, they set about their complete annihilation. Using demolition charges and melter weapons, they sabotaged the geothermal reactors that powered the hives, triggering catastrophic failures that released tectonic energy equivalent to massive earthquakes. The resulting devastation did far more than cripple industrial capacity, and it initiated a planetary die-off that would ultimately render Badab Primaris uninhabitable. The scale of destruction shocked the other loyalist forces. Over 5 billion people died in the tectonic upheaval and subsequent collapse of the hives. Loyalist forces attempting to retreat from the planet's surface found themselves caught in the catastrophe, with thousands of Imperial troops dying in the chaos. The Star Phantoms, who had been coordinating their assault with the Carcharodons' operations, were particularly outraged. They had expected tactical destruction of military targets, not the effective death of an entire world. To this day, the Star Phantoms hold the Carcharodons responsible for those deaths and maintain their enmity toward the chapter. Yet the strategy worked. Huron's forces, shown deprived of support and facing assault from multiple directions, collapsed. The Tyrant of Badab, as Huron was known, was mortally wounded and forced to flee into the Maelstrom with the surviving Astral Claws, where they would eventually become the Red Corsairs, one of the most dangerous Chaos warband in the galaxy. The other rebel chapters were destroyed or forced into penitent crusades. The war was over, the Loyalists victorious, and the Carcharodons had played a crucial role in that victory, despite the horror their methods inspired. In the war's aftermath, the Carcharodons claimed their reward. They were granted the right to conduct a massive red tithe in the Endymion cluster, with the Fire Angels, who had been given dominion over the region, granting permission through gritted teeth. Whilst the Carcharodons descended on the Tranquility System, which had served as the Mantis warriors' primary recruiting grounds. There they implemented their standard recruitment practices, taking an entire generation of young men and forcing them to fight each other to the death, with only the survivors earning the privilege of transformation into Space Marines. This final act encapsulates everything the Badab War revealed about the Carcharodons. They had proven themselves supremely effective warriors, capable of achieving objectives that other chapters could not or would not. They had demonstrated strategic acumen and tactical flexibility, adapting to different operational environments and enemy tactics with ease. They had shown absolute loyalty to the Imperium, fighting without hesitation against fellow Space Marines who had turned traitor. But they had also revealed methods and a philosophy that made them disturbing, even to warriors who had spent decades fighting a brutal civil war. The Badab War placed the Carcharodons in an awkward position within the Imperium's military hierarchy. On one hand, they had proven their value beyond question. The war might have dragged on for years more without their intervention, costing additional thousands of lives and allowing Huron more time to fortify his position. On the other hand, their methods raised profound questions about the costs of victory and whether some prices are too high to pay, even for success. Imperial commanders who had witnessed the Carcharodons in action came away with mixed feelings, grateful for their assistance, but hoping never to work with them again. For the Carcharodons themselves, the war represented vindication. They had emerged from the outer darkness, demonstrated their continued relevance and effectiveness, and secured resources and recruits sufficient to sustain the chapter for decades. Most importantly, they had reminded the Imperium that they still existed, still patrolled the darkness, still stood ready to fulfill their ancient mandate. Then, having accomplished these objectives, they departed back into the void as mysteriously as they had arrived, disappearing beyond the Astronomican's reach to continue their eternal hunt. The Badab War left a complex legacy for the Carcharodons. They had gained official recognition and a measure of legitimacy that they had lacked before. Imperial records now acknowledged their existence and effectiveness. Future commanders facing difficult situations might specifically request Carcharodon assistance rather than being surprised by their uninvited arrival. But this recognition came with scrutiny. The Inquisition maintained closer watch on the chapter after the war, suspicious of warriors whose loyalty was unquestionable, but whose methods bordered on the heretical. Questions about their origins, their gene seed, and their long absence from imperial records remained unanswered, adding to an air of mystery that the chapter did nothing to dispel. Perhaps most significantly, the Badab War demonstrated that the Carcharodons remained fundamentally what they had always been. Warriors operating according to their own understanding of duty, shaped by 10,000 years beyond the Imperium's borders, answerable to authorities that had been dead for millennia. They would serve the Emperor and the Imperium, but on their own terms, using their own methods, pursuing their own objectives. They were allies of convenience, the sort of force you called upon when victory mattered more than how that victory was achieved, when the only acceptable outcome was the complete destruction of the enemy, regardless of what that destruction required. Section 7. Culture and Traditions. To understand the Carcharodons as warriors is important, but to truly comprehend what drives them requires examining their culture, the traditions and beliefs that define their identity and guide their actions across millennia of service in the outer darkness. The chapter's culture is unique among Space Marine chapters, shaped by isolation, brutal necessity, and influences that seem drawn from ancient terror itself, from civilizations that existed long before the Emperor's unification wars. The most immediately notable aspect of Carcharodon culture is their emphasis on silence. Where other Space Marine chapters fill the battlefield with battle cries, war chants, and vocal coordination, the Carcharodons fight in near total quiet. They communicate through hand signals and encrypted microbursts, keeping voice communication to an absolute minimum. Even during training or routine shipboard operations, Carcharodons speak only when necessary, conveying information with maximum efficiency and minimum words. This cultural preference for silence serves multiple purposes. Tactically, it makes them harder to detect and track during combat operations, at denying enemies valuable intelligence about their positions and movements. Psychologically, it unnerves opponents, creating an atmosphere of dread where the only sounds are weapons fire and dying screams. But most fundamentally, the silence is philosophical, reflecting the chapter's belief that true warriors need no words to communicate their purpose or intentions. Actions speak louder than words, and the Carcharodons prefer to let their deeds be their only message. The chapter's traditions show strong influences from Pacific Islander cultures, particularly Polynesian and Maori traditions. This is most evident in their naming conventions and the titles they use for various positions within the chapter. Terms like Shade Lord for Chapter Master, Reaper Prime for the captain responsible for recruitment, and Pale Nomad for the Chief Librarian, all draw from linguistic traditions that predate the Imperium. Many Carcharodon warriors bear names that reflect these same cultural roots, suggesting that either their original recruitment base came from such populations, or that the chapter deliberately adopted these cultural elements as part of their identity. This Pacific Island influence extends to their rituals and ceremonies as well. The Carcharodons practice extensive ritual scarification and tattooing, marking their bodies with patterns that tell the story of their service and victories. These marks are not merely decorative, but serve as records, visual histories written on flesh. A veteran Carcharodon's body becomes a map of his campaigns, his skin covered in scars and tattoos that document every major battle, every significant kill, yet every time he has faced death and survived. For warriors who may serve for centuries in isolation, these physical marks become crucial touchstones of identity, reminders of who they are and what they have accomplished. The chapter's approach to honor and achievement differs significantly from more conventionally organized chapters. Where many Space Marines seek glory through heroic individual action, the Carcharodons value effectiveness and survival above personal glory. A warrior who accomplishes his mission and survives is more honored than one who sacrifices himself for a brilliant but ultimately unsustainable victory. This emphasis on pragmatism over heroism reflects the realities of operating in the outer darkness, where reinforcement is impossible, and every loss weakens the chapter's ability to fulfill its mission. Yet this does not mean the Carcharodons lack a sense of brotherhood or loyalty to one another. The bonds between warriors are, if anything, stronger than in many other chapters, precisely because they must rely so completely on each other. There is no possibility of rescue from outside forces, no hope of evacuation if a mission goes catastrophically wrong. Each warrior's survival depends entirely on his brothers maintaining their positions, accomplishing their objectives, and being willing to die to protect one another. This creates a culture of absolute trust and interdependence, where betrayal or cowardice is unthinkable, because it would endanger everyone. The Carcharodons maintain extensive oral traditions, stories, and legends passed down from older warriors to younger ones during the long voyages between missions. These tales serve educational purposes, teaching tactical lessons through historical examples, but they also preserve the chapter's history and identity in the absence of formal written records. A scout, sitting at the feet of ancient veterans, listening to tales of battles fought centuries before his birth, learns not just how to fight, but why to fight, what it means to be a Carcharodon, what standards he must uphold to be worthy of his brother's respect. These oral traditions include what the chapter calls the Mythos Angelica Mortis, fragmentary texts that seem to describe the chapter's founding and their original mandate. References to the Forgotten One, the Day of Exile, and Remit Unbound to set about the traitor, the alien, and the renegade without mercy appear repeatedly in these traditions. Yet the exact nature of these events has been lost to time or deliberately obscured, but they clearly represent a foundational moment for the chapter, the point at which they accepted their current role and began their endless hunt in the darkness. The Carcharodons show particular reverence for their dreadnoughts, the ancient warriors who have been interred in armored sarcophagi after suffering wounds too severe for even space marine physiology to heal. These wandering ancestors, as the chapter calls them, are treated with a deference that borders on worship. When awakened for battle, they are given place of honor in the formation. When they speak, even the most senior company masters listen with respect bordering on awe. The dreadnoughts represent living connections to the chapter's past, warriors who have served for so long that they remember events and campaigns that are otherwise only legends. One of the most controversial aspects of Carcharodon culture is their practice of taking the red tithe, the forced recruitment from imperial and conquered worlds. The chapter sees this not as theft or kidnapping, but as their due, payment for services rendered in protecting the Imperium from threats that arise in the outer darkness. The Edicts of Exile, ancient legal documents that define the chapter's rights and responsibilities, specifically grant them this privilege. In the Carcharodons' view, the Imperium owes them this tithe because they perform duties that other chapters cannot or will not, operating in regions where normal imperial forces have no presence or power, or yes, the trials that aspirants face during the red tithe are deliberately brutal, designed to break them psychologically before rebuilding them as Carcharodons. The most infamous of these trials is the death match, where groups of aspirants are forced to fight each other until only one survivor remains. This serves multiple purposes beyond simple selection of the strongest. It severs any connection to the aspirant's former life and identity. It demonstrates the central truth of existence in the outer darkness. Survive or die, there are no other options. It binds the survivor to his new brothers through shared trauma and mutual understanding of what was sacrificed to join the chapter. Critics within the Imperium, and there are many, point to these practices as evidence of the chapter's moral degradation. And forcing children to murder each other for the privilege of becoming space marines seems antithetical to the Imperium's supposed values, a practice more suited to chaos cults than loyal servants of the Emperor. The Carcharodons' response, when they bother to respond at all, is pragmatic. They need warriors, not philosophers. Those who survive have proven they possess the will to live and the capability to kill. Those who do not survive were never going to survive the infinitely more dangerous trials of actual combat in the outer darkness. The chapter maintains a complex relationship with the Imperial Creed and the worship of the Emperor. Like most Space Marines, they do not worship the Emperor as a god, but rather revere him as humanity's greatest leader and the architect of their purpose. However, both their isolation and the ancient nature of their traditions mean their religious practices diverge significantly from the mainstream imperial cult. They maintain their own version of the imperial truth, a philosophy that emphasizes duty, survival, and the necessity of violence to preserve humanity's existence. Chaplains in the Carcharodons are less concerned with inspiring faith than with maintaining discipline and ensuring that warriors remember their duty, even during the darkest moments. The chapter's tech marines occupy a similarly unusual position. While they maintain the standard relationship with the Mechanicus and have received training on Mars or its associated Forge worlds, they operate with greater autonomy than tech marines in most chapters. The necessity of maintaining ancient equipment with improvised parts and limited resources has bred a culture of innovation and pragmatism that would horrify more orthodox members of the Mechanicus. Carcharodon tech marines are taught to view machines as tools to be used and adapted rather than sacred artifacts to be preserved unchanged. This philosophical flexibility allows them to keep the chapter's ancient equipment operational, but creates tension with the more conservative elements of the Mechanicus. One of the most sacred traditions in the chapter revolves around the concept of the hunt. When the Carcharodons pursue an enemy, particularly one that has wronged the chapter or represents a significant threat, they declare a hunt. This is more than simply a military operation. It is a sacred obligation that transcends normal strategic considerations. A hunt continues until the target is destroyed or the Carcharodons pursuing it are wiped out. There is no concept of abandoning a hunt once it has been declared. The target will be found, will be killed, and only then will the hunt be satisfied. This tradition can sometimes conflict with strategic necessity or orders from external authorities. There are documented cases of Carcharodon forces refusing to abandon hunts even when ordered to by Imperial commanders, continuing their pursuit across star systems and through danger zones that would normally prompt withdrawal. This stubborn persistence is simultaneously admirable and troubling, demonstrating both their dedication and their unwillingness to subordinate their own traditions to the wider Imperial military hierarchy. The chapter maintains elaborate rituals around death and the harvesting of gene seed. When a Carcharodon falls in battle, his gene seed must be recovered at any cost. The apothecaries who perform this sacred duty are treated with special reverence, and losing gene seed through failure to recover it from a fallen brother is considered one of the gravest sins a warrior can commit. This emphasis on gene seed recovery makes sense given the chapter's isolation and the difficulty of replacing losses, but it has become something more than mere pragmatism. It is a religious obligation, a way of ensuring that the fallen continue to serve the chapter by providing the genetic legacy for future warriors. Interestingly, the Carcharodons seem to maintain different standards of behavior toward different types of enemies. Against Xenos threats or Chaos forces, they fight with relentless aggression and total commitment to annihilation. Against fellow humans, even rebels or heretics, there is sometimes a slight moderation of their methods, a recognition that these are still humans and thus deserving of some minimal consideration, even in their execution. This distinction is subtle and might not be apparent to external observers, but those familiar with the chapter note that civilians in conquered human worlds are slightly less likely to be massacred than civilians in conquered Xenos settlements. The chapter's relationship with their own mutations and psychological conditions reflects their pragmatic worldview. The development of shark-like denticles on their skin is not hidden or considered shameful, but rather viewed as a mark of service and experience. The older and more covered in these growths a warrior is, the more respect he commands from his brothers. Similarly, the blindness is not treated as a flaw to be ashamed of, but rather as a tool to be managed and controlled, a reservoir of fury that can be tapped when necessary, but must be carefully contained to avoid friendly casualties. This acceptance of their own monstrousness extends to how they present themselves to others. The Carcharodons make no effort to appear more human or relatable. They lean into their terrifying appearance, using it as a weapon to break enemy morale before battle is even joined. They understand that an enemy who fears you is already half defeated, as that psychological warfare is as important as physical combat. Their mutations and unusual appearance are thus not disabilities to overcome, but advantages to be exploited, tools in their arsenal just as surely as their bolters and chainswords. Perhaps most fundamentally, Carcharodon culture is defined by their acceptance of what they are and what they must do. They do not apologize for their methods or seek approval from others. They do not question their mandate or wonder if there might be better ways to accomplish their mission. They are hunters, and they hunt. They are killers, and they kill. They are monsters, and they embrace that monstrousness because it is necessary for the role they must play. This absolute certainty, this complete lack of doubt or hesitation is perhaps their greatest strength and most disturbing characteristic. Yet they have transcended questions of morality to achieve pure purpose, becoming exactly what they were created to be without reservation or regret. Section 8. The Carcharodons in the Modern Era. As the Imperium entered the Dark Millennium following the opening of the Great Rift, the Carcharodons' role became more relevant than ever. The galaxy had split in two, with entire sectors cut off from the Astronomican's guiding light. Warp storms raged with unprecedented fury, and threats that had been contained for millennia suddenly burst forth to prey upon humanity's scattered domains. In this time of crisis, warriors who specialized in operating beyond the light in regions where normal Imperial forces could not survive, became invaluable assets. The exact activities of the Carcharodons during the immediate aftermath of the Great Rift's opening remain largely unknown. They were already operating in the darkness beyond Imperial space when the cataclysm occurred, and it may have been months or even years before they realized the scope of the changes that had occurred. When they did make contact with Imperial forces, it was typically brief and cryptic, terse reports of threats eliminated and regions secured without detailed explanations of methods or casualty figures. What can be confirmed is that the chapter survived this tumultuous period intact and possibly even strengthened. Several credible reports place Carcharodon forces engaged against various threats across the galaxy's dark spaces. They have been observed fighting Tyrannid splinter fleets, attempting to enter the galaxy from above the galactic plane, destroying hive ships before they could penetrate deeper into Imperial space. They have engaged Chaos warbands, attempting to establish strongholds in the void between stars, denying the Dark Gods footholds from which to launch raids on vulnerable Imperial worlds. They have hunted Xenos pirate fleets, destroyed Orc conglomerates before they could mass for proper assaults, and eliminated Drukhari raiding parties that ventured too far from their webway portals. The introduction of Primaris Space Marines to the Imperium's chapters raised interesting questions about the Carcharodons. The new generation of Space Marines, created using perfected gene seed technology and enhanced implantation procedures, has offered significant advantages in size, strength, and resilience over their firstborn brothers. Most chapters accepted Primaris reinforcements eagerly, seeing them as crucial to survival in the new, more dangerous galaxy. The Carcharodons' response to this development remains unclear. There are no confirmed reports of Primaris Carcharodons, no sightings of the chapter's grey-clad warriors in the distinctive Mark X power armor that marks the new generation. This could mean several things. Perhaps the chapter has not yet received Primaris reinforcements due to their isolation and the difficulty of coordinating with forces operating beyond Imperial space. Perhaps they have received such reinforcements but choose to deploy them separately or have not yet committed them to operations where they might be observed. Or perhaps the Carcharodons have declined Primaris reinforcements entirely, suspicious of technology that originates from sources they do not fully understand or trust. The last possibility, while speculative, would be consistent with the chapter's character. The Carcharodons have survived for 10,000 years using their own methods and traditions. The sudden introduction of radically different warriors with unknown long-term effects on chapter culture and combat doctrine might be viewed as an unacceptable risk. Additionally, the creation of Primaris Marines requires facilities and resources that the chapter may simply not possess during their long sojourns in the outer darkness. It is difficult to implement a complex new implantation procedure when operating from ancient ships with limited medical capabilities and no opportunity for resupply or technical support. One confirmed modern campaign involving the Carcharodons occurred in the Jericho Reach, where elements of the chapter were observed fighting alongside the Death Watch against Xenos incursions. The Carcharodons have long maintained a relationship with the Death Watch, occasionally seconding warriors to serve in that organization's mixed chambers. These veterans bring unique skills and perspectives shaped by their chapter's operational experiences, making them valuable additions to Death Watch kill teams operating in void environments or against overwhelming odds. The integration of Carcharodons into Death Watch operations is not always smooth, whereas their preference for silence and their brutal methods can clash with the more conventional approaches favored by warriors from other chapters. But their effectiveness is undeniable, and many Death Watch watch captains have learned to deploy Carcharodon veterans in situations requiring absolute ruthlessness or when operating in regions where the usual rules of engagement do not apply. These Carcharodon warriors, serving in the Death Watch, provide one of the few windows into the chapter's current activities, as they occasionally share information about the threats their parent chapter faces in the outer darkness. Another notable modern operation involved the planet Piety 5, where the Carcharodons attempted to use the world as a bulwark against an approaching Tyranid hive fleet. This campaign, documented in the novel Outer Dark, demonstrated how the chapter must balance its savage nature against the practical necessity of working with Imperial civilians and PDF forces. The Carcharodons needed the planet's defenders to be effective, which meant they could not simply terrorize the population into submission as they might have done in other circumstances. The resulting tension between the chapter's instincts and the mission's requirements tested them in ways that pure combat operations did not. The campaign on Piety 5 also highlighted the Carcharodons' relationship with baseline humanity. For warriors who have spent centuries or millennia operating in isolation, the presence of normal humans can be jarring. The vast differences in capability, perspective, and understanding create communication challenges. A Carcharodon warrior who thinks nothing of operating in vacuum or fighting for days without rest has difficulty relating to soldiers who require regular meals, sleep, and environmental protections. Yet the campaign forced them to make that effort, to remember that humanity's survival depends not just on superhuman warriors, but on the countless billions of ordinary people who must be protected rather than merely used as resources. The chapter continues to conduct red tithes when opportunities arise, descending on worlds to harvest recruits according to their ancient rites. These operations have become somewhat controversial in the modern Imperium, particularly as imperial authority has weakened in many regions, and local governments have become more resistant to outside interference. While several worlds have attempted to refuse the Carcharodons' demands or to negotiate modified terms for the tithe. In every recorded case, these attempts failed. The chapter took what they needed by force, demonstrating that while the Imperium may have changed, the Carcharodons have not. This inflexibility regarding their traditions and rights has put them at odds with various imperial authorities. Planetary governors complain to sector commanders about the losses inflicted by red tithes. Inquisitors question whether a chapter operating with such autonomy should continue to be trusted with such broad authority. Even other Space Marine chapters sometimes express discomfort with the Carcharodons' methods, wondering if there should be some mechanism for oversight or accountability. But the Carcharodons have ancient legal documents affirming their rights, documents that technically supersede more recent imperial regulations. Challenging them would require authority that few are willing or able to exercise. The chapter's fleet continues its eternal patrol, though observers note that several of their vessels show increasing signs of age and damage. The Nikor remains operational, but requires increasingly extensive maintenance to keep its ancient systems functioning. Several smaller vessels have been lost in recent centuries, destroyed in combat, or finally succumbing to mechanical failures that could not be repaired. The chapter has partially replaced these losses through capture and salvage, adding enemy vessels that have been refitted and pressed into service. But these replacements are stopgap measures rather than true solutions. This gradual degradation of the chapter's material capabilities raises questions about its long-term viability. Can the Carcharodons sustain their current operational tempo indefinitely, or are they slowly being ground down by attrition that even their skill and ferocity cannot overcome? The answer may depend on factors beyond their control, on whether the Imperium can provide them with new ships and equipment before their current resources fail completely, and whether the chapter would even accept such assistance given their preference for operating independently. Recent reports, fragmentary and difficult to verify, suggest that the Carcharodons have intensified their recruitment efforts and expanded their hunting ranges. This could indicate that they are attempting to rebuild their strength after sustaining significant losses in recent campaigns. Alternatively, it might suggest they are preparing for something, some threat or opportunity that they have identified through their operations in the outer darkness. The chapter's leadership does not share their strategic assessments with outside authorities, so any speculation about their motivations remains exactly that speculation. What seems clear is that the Carcharodons remain committed to their mission, despite the galaxy's increasing chaos and the challenges facing the Imperium. They continue to patrol the darkness, continue to hunt the Emperor's enemies, continue to extract their tithes, and maintain their traditions as they have for 10 millennia. They are a constant in an Imperium that has seen almost everything else change. Warriors whose dedication to duty transcends politics, theology, or the endless bureaucratic shifts that characterize imperial governance. For the scattered populations living near the galactic rim or in the void between spiral arms, the Carcharodons represent a complicated blessing. When threats emerge from the darkness, when alien raiders or chaos warbands attack isolated worlds, there is some small comfort in knowing that somewhere in that same darkness, grey-clad warriors are hunting those threats. The Carcharodons may not arrive in time to prevent every attack, may not save every world, but they ensure that enemies who prey on humanity's isolated domains will eventually face retribution. The predators are themselves being hunted, and the hunters are remorseless. Yet that same comfort is tempered by fear of what might happen if the Carcharodons themselves descend on your world. A red tithe might take your sons and brothers, forcing them into trials where most will die, and survivors will become monsters themselves. The chapter's protection comes with a price, and that price is paid in blood and trauma by populations who have no choice but to accept it. The Carcharodons save humanity from external threats, while being themselves an internal threat that must be endured rather than welcomed. This paradox defines the chapter's role in the modern Imperium. They are necessary and undesirable, effective and frightening, loyal and unsettling. And they embody the brutal calculus that underlies humanity's survival in a hostile galaxy. Sometimes the cost of protection is nearly as terrible as the threats being protected against, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and annihilation is warriors who are barely distinguishable from the enemies they fight. The Carcharodons are what happens when survival becomes the only virtue, when duty trumps all other considerations, when the mission matters more than the methods used to accomplish it. As the Imperium faces an uncertain future, torn apart by internal conflict and external threats, the Carcharodons' unique capabilities may become even more crucial. In a galaxy where vast regions have been cut off from normal Imperial oversight, where warp travel has become even more dangerous than it was, where ancient threats are resurgent and new ones emerge constantly, the ability to operate effectively in isolation becomes paramount. The Carcharodons have been doing this for 10,000 years. They are the experts at surviving and fighting in conditions that would destroy other chapters. Their knowledge and capabilities, however distasteful their methods may be, represent resources the Imperium cannot afford to waste. Whether the chapter will survive long enough to continue playing this role remains to be seen. Their ships are failing, their numbers are uncertain, and the threats they face in the outer darkness are as terrible as any in the galaxy. But they have survived for 10 millennia against odds that should have destroyed them centuries ago. They are predators, and predators do not go extinct easily. But the Carcharodons will endure because endurance is what they do, what they are, what their entire existence has been built around. The void is their home, darkness their element, and in that darkness, they will continue their eternal hunt until the last ship finally fails and the last warrior finally falls. Conclusion. The price of protection. The Carcharodons stand as one of the most enigmatic and troubling forces in the Imperium's military arsenal. They are supremely effective warriors whose combat record speaks for itself, loyal servants of the Emperor who have never wavered in their duty across 10,000 years of service. Yet they are also monsters whose methods push the boundaries of what even the Imperium, no stranger to brutality, considers acceptable. They save lives by taking lives. These protect humanity by becoming something less than human, serve the Imperium by operating outside its normal structures and authorities. Understanding the Carcharodons requires accepting uncomfortable truths about the nature of survival in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Humanity clings to existence in a galaxy that wants it dead, surrounded by threats that view humans as either food, slaves, or obstacles to be eliminated. The Imperium's survival depends not just on the heroes who inspire hope, but also on the monsters who do the dirty work that heroes cannot or will not do. The Carcharodons are those monsters, warriors who have sacrificed their humanity piece by piece so that billions of ordinary humans can continue living their lives in relative ignorance of the horrors that lurk in the darkness. Their story is ultimately one of sacrifice, though not the glorious sacrifice celebrated in imperial propaganda. It is the sacrifice of identity, of normalcy, of connection to the very humanity they protect. Every young man taken during a red tithe loses everything he was to become a Carcharodon. His name, his family, his dreams and hopes all are stripped away, replaced with duty and discipline and an existence of constant violence. The survivors of this transformation spend their lives as predators prowling the void, growing more alien with each passing year as their gene seed mutations accumulate. By the time they die, assuming they live long enough to become veterans, they have become things that barely resemble the humans they once were. This transformation is necessary because the outer darkness requires it. But the threats that exist beyond the Imperium's borders cannot be fought by warriors who retain too much humanity, too much compassion or hesitation. They require killers who can look upon atrocity and respond with greater atrocity, who can make decisions that would break normal men's minds without flinching or regretting. The Carcharodons have become these killers through 10,000 years of selection and training and genetic modification. They are what they need to be, even if what they need to be is terrifying. Yet there are hints, occasional glimpses, that something human persists even in these warriors. The bonds between battle brothers, the loyalty they show to their chapter and its traditions, the care with which they preserve their fallen comrades' gene seed, and all of these suggest that some spark of humanity remains beneath the savage exterior. Perhaps this is why the Carcharodons are so effective. They are not mindless killing machines, but intelligent, adaptable warriors who remember just enough of what they once were to understand what they are fighting for, even if they can never truly be part of it again. The chapter's legacy is complex and contradictory. They have saved countless lives through their interventions against threats in the outer darkness, eliminating enemies before those enemies could penetrate deeper into Imperial space. They have maintained a vigil in regions where no other Imperial forces operate, providing a layer of defense that the Imperium desperately needs but rarely acknowledges. Yet they have also caused tremendous suffering through their red tithes and their brutal methods, destroying lives and communities in pursuit of their mission. The balance sheet of their service shows lives saved and lives destroyed in roughly equal measure, leaving observers to wonder if the protection they provide is worth the cost they extract. For the Carcharodons themselves, such questions are irrelevant. They do not measure their service in lives saved or lives lost, in moral victories or ethical compromises. They measure it in duty fulfilled, in enemies destroyed, in the continuation of the hunt. They are beyond questions of morality, having transcended such concerns through centuries of operating in an environment where survival is the only value that matters. They are what humanity becomes when survival is all that's left, or when every other consideration has been stripped away to reveal the essential core. Kill or be killed, hunt or be hunted, endure or perish. As we conclude this examination of the Carcharodons, we are left with profound questions about the nature of duty, sacrifice, and what it means to be human in an inhuman universe. The space sharks have given everything to their mission, have become monsters to fight monsters, have sacrificed their souls so that humanity's soul might survive. Whether this bargain was worth making remains debatable, but the bargain itself is irrevocable. The Carcharodons exist, will continue to exist until the last of them falls, and the Imperium will continue to benefit from their service, even while being disturbed by their methods. They are the grey ghosts of the outer darkness, as the silent hunters who patrol the void, the sharks who swim in the deep spaces between stars. They are loyal to the Emperor and the Imperium, but answerable to neither in any meaningful sense. They are effective and terrifying, necessary and unwanted, saviors and monsters all at once. They are the Carcharodons, and in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, they will continue their eternal hunt until the stars themselves burn out and the darkness finally claims everything. If you've enjoyed learning about these brutal killers and silent hunters, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. There are countless chapters and factions in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, each with their own stories of duty, sacrifice, and survival against impossible odds. Yet the Carcharodons are just one thread in the vast web of the Imperium's defense, but their story exemplifies the terrible choices that humanity must make to survive in a universe that offers no mercy to the weak. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the darkness where the space sharks hunt. Remember, in the void, no one can hear you scream, but the Carcharodons can hear everything, see everything, and they are always hunting. The Emperor protects, but sometimes his protection comes with teeth.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.